Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel, I share real life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving back from my coworker Jenna's place on a Tuesday night, a little after 11. She lived out past the edge of town, one of those new developments built next to miles of empty fields. But the drive was usually quick, just 15 minutes along County Road 12, a straight shot with barely any traffic that late. I'd done it dozens of times. The night was clear, cool, nothing unusual. I wasn't tired, just ready to get home, shower, and crash. I remember thinking how bright my headlights looked when I pulled onto the county road, slicing across the gravel shoulder and lighting up the asphalt in a clean beam. Then, maybe 3 minutes into the drive, the beams started to dull. Not flicker, just fade. It happened slowly, like the darkness ahead thickened and swallowed some of the light. At first, I thought maybe my high beams had switched off accidentally, but the dashboard icon was still lit. The headlights were technically on, but they weren't doing their job. Everything 10 or 15 feet ahead of my bumper looked softer, muted, like I'd driven into a faint fog even though the air was perfectly clear. I tapped the lights off and on again. No change. The road kept absorbing the brightness like it was endless cloth. I tried to tell myself it was just some trick of the air or humidity, but my hands had tightened on the wheel. My chest felt tense in a way I didn't have a name for. A moment later, the radio, just background music I barely paid attention to, cut out mid-song. No static, no warning. Just silence. The screen still showed it was playing, but no sound came through. The silence in the car felt too absolute, like the air inside thickened too. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, suspended above the road maybe 100 yards ahead. Not bright enough to light anything around it, not shaped like anything I could identify. Just a pale smudge of light, hanging in place like someone had pressed their thumb against the sky and left a soft print behind. It didn't move toward me or away. It stayed exactly where it was. I slowed down without deciding to, dropped from 50 to 30, then to 20. The glow stayed the same size the entire time, which made no sense. If it were far away, it shouldn't look identical at different speeds. If it were close, I would have reached it already. The dimming headlights almost made it worse. They illuminated the road just enough to make the darkness around the glow feel unnatural, like the light from the car and the glow overhead were refusing to interact. Then my dashboard clock flickered. It jumped from 11:14 to 11:17. Just like that. No fade, no glitch. A 3-minute skip. I breathed out hard through my nose, trying to steady myself. I'd had electrical issues in cars before, but nothing like this. The engine still ran smoothly. The steering felt normal, but everything else, the lights, the radio, the display, seemed to react to whatever was up ahead. At about 50 yards away, the faint glow started to dim. Not suddenly, almost reluctantly, like it was losing interest. First it thinned around the edges, then the center faded until it dissolved completely. The headlights seemed to strengthen the moment it disappeared, brightening back to their proper level as if someone had lifted a shade from in front of them. I drove forward slowly until I reached the exact stretch of road where the glow had been. There was nothing there. No fog, no insects, no light reflecting off low clouds. The asphalt looked the same as always, gray, cracked, barely maintained. The fields on both sides were silent except for the sound of the engine idling. The radio came back on, picking up in the middle of the exact same song, like it had never paused. The headlights stayed strong. Even the night itself seemed to return to normal, as if whatever had been there was gone for good. I sat there in the middle of the road, engine running, trying to make sense of what happened. I checked my phone, still on 11:17. The car clock matched it. 3 minutes missing from somewhere I couldn't account for, even though I remembered every second of the drive. I kept expecting another faint glow to appear overhead, or the lights to dim again, but nothing happened. Eventually, I put the car in gear and kept driving. That should have been the end of it. But about a mile down the road, I passed an area where the field grass grew taller than the fence posts. As my headlights swept across the tall grass, the beam bent, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough that the edges of the light curved inward, like it was bending around something I couldn't see. There was nothing in front of me. Nothing casting shadows, nothing blocking the light. Yet, the edges of the beam curved for a full second before snapping back to normal. It was so quick I almost thought I imagined it, but the hairs on my arms lifted immediately. My foot eased off the gas. My heartbeat picked up again. Whatever passed over the road earlier hadn't just been light. It altered something in the air, like the space itself had been warped or stretched for a moment and then reset. I didn't stop this time. I just kept driving. When I finally reached the turn toward my neighborhood, the street lamps looked brighter than usual. Almost too bright, like my eyes were still adjusting from something I couldn't see anymore. My porch lights were on when I got home, even though I never leave them on when I go out. The dog next door barked once, short and confused, then went silent. Inside the house, everything was normal. My phone didn't glitch. The wall clock matched the car. But for the rest of the night, every time I walked past a window, I half expected to see a faint glow hovering above the street, waiting the way it had waited over the road. I didn't see it again. The night passed without anything else strange happening. But every time I drive that same route now, especially when it's late and quiet, I keep my eyes on the stretch where the light once hung. The headlights seem to dim just the tiniest bit whenever I reach it, only for a moment. So subtle, I almost convince myself it isn't real. Almost. I know what dimmed headlights look like. I know what fog and high beams and clouds do. And what I saw that night wasn't any of those things. It was like something else was absorbing the light, something waiting there in the dark, suspended above the road, long enough for me to notice, and long enough to know exactly when to disappear. I was already half awake when the ceiling started to brighten. I don't know why. I hadn't heard anything, and my phone wasn't buzzing. It was one of those early hours moments where your mind floats just above sleep, and any tiny change snaps you further awake. I remember staring at the ceiling, not even fully processing what I was seeing at first. The glow wasn't like a car passing outside or someone turning on a hallway light. It was too even, too soft. A pale white color, almost gray, spreading from the center of the ceiling outward. It didn't have edges. It was like the room itself was exhaling light. I stayed still for a long moment, watching it grow brighter. Not harsh, never harsh, but undeniably brighter, enough that the corners of my room took shape. My dresser, the pile of clothes I hadn't folded, the outline of the door. It looked like the start of dawn, except there was no window above me. Just plaster. My first thought was that maybe someone had pulled into the driveway. My bedroom faces the backyard, not the street, but light can bounce in weird ways. Still, it didn't look like reflected light. It looked like the source was inside the room, above me. I didn't move. I don't know why. Something in my chest tightened, like sitting up too fast might disturb whatever was happening. The glow kept strengthening in this slow, steady way, and I just lay there feeling more awake by the second. Right as I finally pushed myself upright, the light vanished. Not gradually. Instantly. One moment the room had a pale haze to it, and the next it was pitch black again. My eyes strained so hard to readjust that it hurt. I blinked several times, reaching for my phone on the nightstand. When I tapped the screen, the brightness felt jarringly artificial after what I had just seen. It was 3:12 a.m. I sat there for a while, listening for anything that might explain it. But the house was quiet, not silent, just normal quiet. Refrigerator hum. The faint tick from the old wall clock down the hall. Nothing that matched a bright, room-filling glow. Eventually, I got up and checked the hallway, then the living room. The front door was locked. The curtains were undisturbed. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard sat still under a nearly moonless sky. Not even the motion light had turned on. I tried to shrug it off, told myself I must have been dreaming more intensely than I thought. But when I went back to my bedroom, something felt off, like the air had changed. Not warmer or colder, just different, as if someone had opened a door earlier and shut it quietly. I got back into bed and lay there on my side, staring at the ceiling again. It looked normal, a little uneven from when the last owners had repainted it, but normal. After maybe 10 minutes, I started drifting off again. That's when I noticed the sound. a faint, low vibration. Not even a sound, really, more like the smallest shift in pressure, the kind you might feel in an elevator between floors. It pulsed once, soft enough that if I'd been asleep, I wouldn't have felt it. Then again, and again. 3 pulses total. Each one was spaced almost evenly, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I held my breath without meaning to. The vibration wasn't coming from the floor or the walls. It felt like it came from above, directly above, the exact place where the glow had been spreading. I sat up again, slower this time. No light appeared. No more pulses, just dark, regular, normal room. That somehow felt worse. I got up again, this time grabbing my phone flashlight and pointing it at the ceiling. Nothing. No marks, no cracks, no insects or shadows, just slightly uneven white paint. Still, the air near the ceiling felt faintly warmer than the rest of the room when I raised my hand toward it. Not significantly, just enough to notice. I backed away and sat down on the edge of the bed. My breathing felt louder than it should have. I kept glancing at the ceiling, waiting for the glow to start again, half hoping it would, because at least then I'd know I hadn't imagined it. Instead, the room stayed dark. I didn't sleep again for the rest of the night. I walked the house twice. Sat in the living room with the lamp on until dawn cracked through the blinds. When the real morning light finally hit the walls, I felt this weird rush of relief. Like the sun itself had confirmed something about the night didn't belong to it. Later that morning, when I headed out for work, I noticed something strange in the backyard. The grass directly behind the house, just a patch maybe 3 feet wide, looked pressed down like something had settled there overnight. Not footprints, not an animal shape, just a smooth depression, almost as if heat had flattened it. I crouched down and touched the grass. It wasn't warm, but it didn't feel cold from the night air either, more like the temperature had equalized unusually fast. I didn't mention it to anyone. What was I supposed to say? That my ceiling lit up without a source and the backyard looked like something had hovered above it? That night, I stayed up later than usual. Not on purpose, just nervous energy. When I finally went to bed, I kept the hallway light on. Not that it would make a difference if something like that glow came back, but the thought of total darkness didn't sit right with me. Around midnight, before drifting off, I found myself staring at the ceiling again, half waiting for a brightening that never came. But every now and then, even weeks later, I'll wake up suddenly in the middle of the night with this weird certainty that the room is brighter than it should be. Not enough to see anything, just enough to feel it. And sometimes when I sit up quickly enough, the darkness seems deeper than it should be, like something just moved out of the way. I was taking one of my late walks around the neighborhood, the kind I do when my head feels too loud to stay inside. It was close to midnight, early October, cool enough that you could see your breath in short puffs. The streets were empty, which wasn't unusual for my part of town, just a regular suburban grid outside Spokane, a place where porch lights and recycling bins were about the only things awake at that hour. I'd only made it 2 blocks when I started hearing the pulsing. At first, I thought it was coming from a house, maybe someone's bass-heavy music turned way down, but it wasn't directional. It wasn't loud either. Just a faint rhythmic thump, 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 like a heartbeat, but slower and wider somehow. I kept walking, waiting for it to disappear or line up with some familiar sound, but it didn't. It followed me, or maybe surrounded me. By the time I reached the park entrance, I realized the sound wasn't coming from ground level at all. It was overhead. I stopped walking and listened harder. The pulsing wasn't mechanical or electrical. It didn't vibrate through the ground. It was in the air above me, steady and strange. When I tilted my head back to look up, I wasn't expecting to see anything. Not really. The sky was clear, just a scattering of stars and the faint orange haze from the city. But then I saw the circle. A dim, pale light, maybe the size of a coin held at arm's length, moving in a slow, perfect loop above me. Not flickering, not changing shape, just circling with this unnatural precision. I couldn't tell how high it was, whether it was just above the rooftops or somewhere much further up, because it didn't illuminate anything around it. It didn't cast light, it was light. I stood there staring, mouth slightly open, for longer than I'd like to admit. The pulsing sound matched its movement. Each time it completed a loop, there was a slight swell in volume before it drifted softer again. It was subtle enough that I wondered if I was imagining the connection, but deep down it felt too synchronized to be coincidence. After a few rotations, the light slowed. The circle widened for a second, then contracted like something adjusting or shifting. Then the looping motion stopped completely, and the light hovered motionless. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't feel watched exactly. It was more like the air around me had thickened, or the night had become too quiet in a way that wasn't natural. Even the distant hum of traffic from the highway seemed muted. I took a step backward. The light responded immediately, not by moving toward me or away, but by drifting sideways, almost lazily, in the same direction I had moved. It wasn't following me. Not exactly. Just adjusting position like it was keeping me within some invisible zone. That was enough for my body to make the decision before my mind did. I turned and started walking home. Not running, walking. Too fast to be casual, too slow to be panic. My footsteps echoed slightly on the pavement, and for a few seconds I refused to look up again, convinced that if I did, the light would be directly overhead. But the pulsing kept going. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm felt closer now, vibrating lightly in my chest. When I finally forced myself to glance upward, the light was still above the street, drifting in a gentle diagonal path that matched my pace almost perfectly. It wasn't closing the distance, it wasn't leaving either, it was just there. I crossed onto Birchwood Drive, my street, and the light shifted again, subtly but enough that I noticed. Its path flattened out, the movement becoming more of a slow slide instead of a drift. The pulsing sound softened as if it were rising higher, even though the light didn't fade. I kept walking. My house was maybe 200 yards away. I tried to think logically, but every explanation broke apart the second I examined it. A drone couldn't move that smoothly or that quietly. A plane wouldn't hover. A balloon wouldn't create a pulsing sound or a perfect circular motion. And nothing man-made would adjust to me the way this thing seemed to. When I passed Mrs. Hartley's yard, then with the gaudy stone fountain that never worked, the pulsing suddenly stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The light froze in place above the street. It dimmed slightly like a dying ember and then began drifting upward. Not fast. Not slow. Just a steady vertical rise. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. I just kept my eyes on it as it climbed higher and higher, growing smaller until it was no brighter than the faintest star. And then it winked out completely. The instant it disappeared, the normal sounds of the night came rushing back. Crickets, a distant dog barking, the low hum of the transformer near the corner. I hadn't realized how quiet everything had gotten until the noise returned. My street felt like my street again, but I wasn't convinced the moment was over. When I reached my driveway, I stopped and looked back the way I had come. Nothing out of the ordinary, just trees, houses, calm air, everything exactly the way it always was. Inside the house, I locked the door immediately. Not something I usually did the second I walked in, but it felt necessary. The living room lights were still on from earlier, casting a warm, normal brightness across the walls. I stood there for maybe a full minute, listening to my heart gradually settle back into a natural rhythm. The strange thing was how normal everything looked, like the world outside had no memory of what just happened. Curiosity eventually pushed me to the window. I pulled the blinds back just enough to see the sky. Nothing, no movement, no dim circle of light, just stars and a faint haze from the city. But my eyes kept drifting to the exact patch of sky where the thing had disappeared. Even though it was empty now, I felt this strange tension, as if the air in that spot wasn't quite right. I didn't go back out for the rest of the night. I stayed awake on the couch until just after 4, when the sky started to lighten, watching the ceiling, the windows, the shadows, listening for anything that might hint at that pulsing starting again. Nothing did. It's been a while since then, and I've gone on late walks again, though nowhere near as often. Every time I step outside, I look up first, scanning the sky for that faint circle or any unusual movement. I try to tell myself I'm just being cautious, but part of me knows I'm waiting for something. Not fear exactly, but anticipation mixed with dread. And sometimes when I'm walking alone and the night goes just a little too quiet, I catch myself listening for that slow, deliberate pulse above me, wondering if it's still out there somewhere, circling until the moment it decides to drift back. I was stretched out on the hood of my old Subaru behind my cousin Jake's cabin in eastern Oregon, staring up at the sky the way I usually did when I visited. The property sits miles from anything, just dry fields, scattered pines, and a ridge line that blocks most of the little town's lights. It was late September, a cold, clear night. One of those nights where the stars feel sharp enough to cut you if you look too long. I'd gotten in earlier that afternoon and couldn't sleep, so I wandered out with a blanket and a thermos and just watched the sky. I wasn't expecting anything weird. I was mostly trying to tire myself out. The first strange thing was subtle. I noticed this cluster of stars, not a constellation I knew, just a small tight group near Cassiopeia, shift a little. Not twinkle or fade, actually shift, like something dark passed in front of them for a second. I thought maybe my eyes were tired or I'd blinked weird. I sat up, focused, waited. Everything looked normal again. A few minutes later, it happened again. Same cluster. This time, I was sure I hadn't blinked. They slid sideways, just barely, maybe the width of my thumb held at arm's length, and then snapped back into place like they were on strings someone had tugged. I lowered the thermos and listened. The night was quiet, too quiet for that time of year. Usually you hear insects buzzing, the dry grass popping, distant cows or something. But it was calm, like even the animals were trying not to draw attention to themselves. I told myself it was some kind of illusion. Temperature differences. Eye fatigue. Whatever. Still, I couldn't shake the weirdness of it. I ended up calling Jake even though he was already asleep. I just wanted someone else awake, even if I wasn't going to explain anything. His phone rang once and went straight to voicemail. Unusual, but not impossible. Service out here sucked. I put the phone back in my pocket and climbed off the hood. The stars didn't feel calm anymore. The whole sky felt aware, like I wasn't the one doing the watching. I started walking toward the field behind the cabin. There's a fence out there with a little metal gate that creaks no matter how you open it. When I reached it, I rested my hand on the cold bar and turned around to look at the sky again. The cluster shifted a third time, and this one wasn't subtle. It glided a short distance, smooth, controlled, and stopped. Not flickering, not fading, just repositioning itself like the whole section of sky had loosened. That was when I felt the pressure in the air. It came on fast, like standing next to a big speaker right before the bass hits. Not sound exactly, more like my chest tightened and my breathing went shallow. My ears felt like they wanted to pop but couldn't. I glanced around for wind or some kind of storm front, but the grass wasn't moving at all. Then everything near me, the fence, the trees, the dirt underfoot, seemed to hold its breath. No insects, no night breeze, no distant hum of anything human. The silence pressed in until the only sound left was my own pulse in my ears. I stepped back from the fence without meaning to. Overhead, the cluster of stars dimmed. Not all the way, just like a thin veil passed over them. The dark space between the stars looked wrong. Thicker. Like there was something there I couldn't quite see. I had this awful impression that whatever was blocking them wasn't at a distance. It felt close. Too close for anything in the sky should ever feel. I reached for my phone in reflex, maybe to take a picture, maybe just to call someone, but when I pulled it out, the screen stayed black. It wasn't dead. The battery had been around 70%, but it wouldn't turn on. I held the power button, but nothing happened. That pressure in the air grew stronger, like it was settling around me. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't feel like danger exactly, but it felt intentional, which was almost worse. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything released. My ears popped. The pressure eased. A tiny breeze rustled across the grass, and the sounds of insects flickered back to life all at once, like someone had unmuted the world. The stars brightened to their original positions as if nothing had happened. The sky looked normal again. I tried my phone. It turned on instantly, like nothing was wrong. The time read 1:47 a.m., and I couldn't remember what it had been before the weirdness started. I hadn't looked. I walked back to the cabin slowly, turning around every few steps to check the sky. Everything stayed still, ordinary. The chill was getting sharper, and the adrenaline had worn off enough that I was starting to feel stupid for being scared, even though the fear hadn't gone anywhere. When I got inside, I found the digital clock on the microwave blinking 12. Like the power had flickered. but the cabin lights had been on when I came in. I checked the fridge display, same thing, reset. I looked over at the stove clock, flashing. All of them said 12. The power hadn't gone out. I would have noticed the lights cutting. I considered waking Jake, but decided against it. I didn't want to explain any of this half awake, and I didn't want him stepping outside and not seeing anything. I shut myself in the guest room and lay down fully dressed, just staring at the ceiling. Around 3:30, just when I was finally drifting off, I heard something outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like dry grass brushing against itself in a slow, steady pattern. A few swishes, then silence. A pause. Then another set. It sounded like someone walking without lifting their feet. I froze. The sound moved around the side of the cabin, then stopped underneath the guest room window. I didn't get up. I didn't want to look. I just held my breath and waited, every muscle locked. After a long moment, something extremely faint tapped the outer wall. Not a knock, more like a fingertip testing the surface. Then nothing. No footsteps leaving. No movement. Just nothing. I stayed awake until the first hint of sunrise pushed through the curtains, and when I finally checked outside, there were no footprints or disturbed patches of grass. The fence gate was closed. The field looked untouched. Jake didn't believe me when I told him the next morning. He laughed it off the way people do when they don't want to entertain strange possibilities. I didn't push it. I wasn't looking for someone to validate what I felt. I just needed to say it out loud. I left that afternoon instead of staying the weekend like I planned. The road home felt longer than usual. I kept glancing up at the sky, not looking for anything, just making sure everything stayed where it was supposed to be. It did. But every once in a while, I find myself searching for that same cluster of stars. And even when they look perfectly still, I can't shake the sense that something out there is capable of moving them, or at least making it look like they moved, and that I happen to be looking at the exact moment it did. I was awake later than I meant to be, sitting on my couch with the TV on mute and my laptop open but unused. It was one of those still, quiet nights where the house feels almost too calm. No wind, no traffic on my street, not even the usual barking from the neighbor's dog. Just this soft, heavy silence that made every little sound feel out of place. I remember glancing at the clock on the stove, 12:43 a.m., and thinking I should probably just go to bed. My house in Maple Ridge isn't big, just a small, one-story place I moved into after splitting up with my ex. I'd gotten used to living alone again, but nights like that always made the place feel bigger than it really was. I stood up to close the blinds in the living room when every electronic device in the house flickered. Not just the lights, everything. The TV screen flashed white for a second, the microwave clock reset, my laptop screen glowed brighter and then dimmed sharply, and even the tiny LED on my modem blinked like it was shorting out. And then the sky outside flashed. It wasn't bright like lightning. It was faint, more like someone held a huge, weak flashlight behind the clouds. It lit up the neighborhood for maybe half a second with no thunder afterward and no sound of any kind. Just a silent glow that came and went before I even understood what I was looking at. I froze next to the blinds for a few seconds. My house hummed softly, the way it does when the power first kicks back after an outage, but the electricity never actually went off. Everything just flickered. I checked my phone. No alerts, no outage notification. The Wi-Fi reconnected on its own after a moment. I felt this weird urge to step outside, even though I already didn't like how the air felt, still and charged, like right before a storm. I opened the front door anyway. The street looked normal. All the houses were dark, except for a few porch lights. The sky overhead was mostly cloudy, but the clouds were low, thin, almost translucent in places. I could see a few stars poking through gaps. Nothing glowed now. Nothing looked unusual. I stepped off my porch and listened. The silence felt heavier outside. No insects, no distant cars, no rustling. Just a thick quiet that made me too aware of my own breathing. I walked to the end of my driveway and looked up again. The clouds drifted slowly across the sky, but in the center of them was a spot, just one, where the texture looked different. The clouds there seemed smoother, like they'd been smeared by a thumb. I stared at it, trying to decide if I was imagining it. As I watched, that smooth patch brightened. Not a lot, but enough to make the edges of it stand out from the rest of the sky. A pale, blurry glow coming from behind the clouds. It faded before I could blink. I waited to see if it would happen again. Nothing. When I turned to go back inside, I noticed the motion sensor light on my neighbor's garage was on. It usually only activates when someone walks right in front of it, but their driveway was empty. No raccoons, no wind, no movement at all. The light turned off while I was looking at it. I went back inside, shut the door, and locked it without thinking. The house felt colder now. I walked around checking things the way you do when something feels wrong, even though you can't explain why. I made sure the back door was locked, too, then returned to the living room. My phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was a weather app alert. No severe weather detected in your area. That was it. Just that one line. No explanation why it sent it. I tossed my phone down and tried to distract myself by watching something dumb online. But around 1:10, the TV screen flickered again. Not off, just this bright wash of static-like light across the bottom edge that lasted a second and then vanished. My laptop chimed at the same time, like it disconnected and reconnected to the power brick, even though I wasn't touching it. I sat perfectly still. My ears felt warm, like pressure was building inside my head. Not painful, just this dull inward push. And then everything went quiet again. The refrigerator clicked off. The HVAC fan died. Even the tiny hum of electricity running through the walls felt like it stopped. It wasn't a blackout, my lamp was still on, but the air lost that constant background sound you don't notice until it's gone. That was when I heard it. A soft, low tone outside. Not musical, not mechanical. More like a distant, steady resonance. Almost felt more than heard. I stepped toward the window slowly and parted the blinds just enough to look out. The street was empty, but the sky above the cul-de-sac looked wrong again. The clouds had a faint, bluish tint. Subtle, like someone was shining a weak light through wet paper. The glow didn't pulse or move, it just held there, a dim color that didn't belong. I leaned closer to the glass, and as soon as I did, the glow faded. The normal cloud color returned instantly. The moment it disappeared, the background hum of the house snapped back. The fridge kicked on. The HVAC fan whooshed. The electronics all resumed their tiny vibrations. Everything felt normal again, almost aggressively normal. I backed away from the window and sat down on the couch, my heartbeat loud in the silence left behind. I didn't know if I should call someone. Who would I even call? I thought about texting my friend Katie, since she lived 2 blocks over. I unlocked my phone to send a message, but before I typed anything, the screen brightness dropped all the way down. Then it brightened, then dropped again. The slider moved on its own like someone was dragging it with invisible fingers. I locked the screen immediately, set the phone face down, and didn't touch it after that. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected the house to flicker again or that low tone to come back. Nothing else happened though. The night stayed quiet. When the sun finally came up, the house felt normal again. Almost boring. My devices worked fine. Even the microwave clock was accurate again, though I don't remember resetting it. Later that morning, while making coffee, I noticed something I missed during the night. The outdoor security light on my back porch was turned off at the switch. I never turn it off. It's always on the automatic setting. I flipped it back on without thinking. Then I realized something else. The switch wasn't just off. It was halfway between on and off, like it had been moved slowly and stopped there. I stood and stared at it for a long time. I haven't told anyone what happened. Not really. People joke about power flickers all the time, and weird lights in the sky don't usually mean anything. But every once in a while, usually late at night, I stop what I'm doing and just listen, waiting to see if everything goes quiet again, all at the exact same moment. So far, it hasn't, but I still check the sky every night before bed, just in case. I woke up because of the light. Not bright light, just the faint glow of my phone screen lying face down on the nightstand. I could see the reflection of it on the wall, a soft rectangle pulsing every few seconds like it was trying to get my attention. I reached over, half asleep, and when I picked it up, the screen said, "Recording saved, 3:02 a.m." I never start recordings in my sleep. I don't even use the voice memo app. When I opened it, The clip was 37 seconds long. No waveform spikes, no talking, just this low hum, steady and smooth like a far-off engine. Right near the end, there was a single metallic click. Sharp, clean, like someone tapping a ring against a railing. I just stared at the screen for a minute. My apartment was dead quiet. No traffic, no neighbors, no pets, nothing that could have made that sound. I didn't hit play again. Not right away. Instead, I got up and checked the front door, even though I knew it was locked. I checked the kitchen window, the bathroom, my bedroom closet, everything untouched. The place felt normal, but I couldn't shake this crawling feeling under my skin, like the air had changed while I was asleep. It was early March, cool enough outside that the windows collected that thin fog around the edges. When I went back into my bedroom, the fog on the glass caught my attention. Someone had wiped a streak in it, a short vertical line, maybe from a fingertip. I don't sleepwalk. And I had definitely closed the curtains. I replayed the recording then, holding the phone up to my ear. The hum sounded deeper the second time, almost physical. Not vibration, not bass. Just presence. The metallic click still didn't sound like anything familiar from my building. Not pipes, not heat vents, nothing like that. It was too deliberate. I lay back down, wide awake, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. But I kept listening for that hum, half expecting it to start up somewhere in the walls. It didn't. The next morning on my way to work, I tried to not think about it. I work security for a warehouse outside Missoula. Boring overnight shifts most nights, but I'd swapped with another guard and ended up off that night. Lucky timing, I guess. The sun was out, the town looked normal, and for a while I managed to convince myself sleep deprivation had played tricks on me. That lasted until I checked my background apps at lunchtime. The voice recorder had been opened 3 separate times between 2:58 and 3:04 a.m. I hadn't touched my phone during that window. I hadn't even moved from the bed except to sit up. Something about seeing the exact timestamps made the whole thing feel heavier, like it wasn't just a glitch or an accidental tap. Something had woken me right in the middle of it. When I got home that afternoon, I went straight to the bedroom. The fog on the window had dried, but the streak was still there, just barely visible in the dust. A single narrow line like a nail or a fingertip dragged downward. I checked the lock on the window. Secure. The screen in place. That night, I set the phone on my dresser instead of the nightstand. I didn't turn on any special apps or motion sensors. I just wanted to see if anything would happen if I wasn't touching it. I woke up twice before sunrise, once at 40, then again around 4. No light, no sound, just regular half-awake moments. Both times the phone was where I left it, but when I checked it in the morning, the voice recorder had another new file. Length 12 seconds. Timestamp 3:02 a.m. again. I hadn't woken up at 3. I hit play. The first few seconds were silent, not quiet. Silent, like the phone had cut out everything except its own internal noise. Then the hum started again, the same deep, steady sound from the night before. Only this time it felt closer, louder, like it was directly above the phone instead of somewhere in the room. There was no metallic click at the end, just a short, uneven scrape before the recording stopped. My hands were shaking a little when I locked the screen. Not fear exactly, more like confusion sharpening into something uneasy. I didn't know what to look for or what to expect. I just felt watched, which made no sense because the apartment was small and I could see every corner of it. I left for work early, hoping a change of scene would help. It didn't. All shift, I kept glancing at my phone, even though I'd turned everything off. The anxiety felt stupid, but it was real. Around midnight, a coworker named Travis stopped by my station. He's older, late 50s, talks a lot more than he listens, but he's decent enough. "You look tired," he said. "Everything okay at home?" I shrugged it off, said it was just bad sleep. But he didn't move on right away. Instead, he asked, "You hear that humming last night? Thought it was a generator out on the southwest side, but couldn't find anything running." My chest tightened. I asked him what time. He said, "Little after 3. Why?" I didn't tell him why. After work, I bought a cheap baby monitor from a 24-hour pharmacy, not the camera kind, just audio. I didn't want video. I didn't want to see something I couldn't explain. But I wanted to know if the sound was real or if the phone was picking up some weird electrical interference. That night, I plugged the monitor into the wall near my bed and left the receiver on the pillow next to me. I fell asleep faster than I expected. When I woke up, sunlight was pouring through the curtains. I sat up too quickly, grabbing the receiver before my eyes were fully open. The battery indicator was flashing, but the saved audio alert was lit. I replayed it immediately. The recording wasn't long, maybe 20 seconds, but it started with a faint crackle, like static building in slow bursts. Then the hum came in, deeper than I remembered, vibrating through the cheap speaker in a way that made the plastic casing buzz in my hand. About halfway through, another sound layered on top of it. Not the metallic click this time, something softer, like fabric brushing or someone shifting their weight on the floor. It was subtle but unmistakable. It had rhythm, presence. Then the hum cut out abruptly. No fade, no distortion, just gone. I checked the time the monitor had logged it, 3:02 a.m. My phone, sitting untouched on the dresser, also had a new recording saved at 3:02 a.m. I didn't listen to that one right away. I walked the apartment first, slowly. Every room, every window, every lock, everything was exactly where it should be, but the feeling, the pressure in the air, the wrongness, hung over everything like static before a storm. Only after I'd checked it all twice did I sit on the edge of the bed and open the phone's recording. This one started differently. A sharp intake of breath. Mine, I think. Like I'd stirred in my sleep just before the app started capturing. Then the hum. But softer, almost restrained. And under it, buried so faintly I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been holding the phone to my ear, was something else. Not a word. Not breathing. Just a single quiet metallic click. Exactly like the first night. I stopped halfway through and closed the app. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense that whatever this was, it was intentional. Something was coming back at exactly the same time, 3 nights in a row, and the only proof I had were these strange little audio fragments. That day, I called in sick. I didn't want to leave the apartment, but I didn't want to stay in it either. I just drove around the city, aimlessly, letting traffic mask the anxiety clawing at me. When evening came, I didn't set up the monitor again. Didn't do anything special. I just left my phone on the couch and tried to fall asleep out there, hoping the change of location might break the pattern. I woke at 3:02 a.m., wide awake. The apartment was dark and still, but I heard something, just for a second, in the direction of the bedroom. A soft tap, not metallic, barely there. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The sound didn't repeat. When I finally turned on a light and checked my phone, there was no new recording. Nothing. I waited until the sun came up before going back into the bedroom. The window looked normal. The curtains were in place. The streak was still faintly there, but unchanged. I still don't know what to make of any of it. The recordings stopped after that night, and nothing strange has happened since. But every time I wake up in the middle of the night, even for something normal, my first instinct is to check the clock. Always checking for 3:02. I was sitting in my car next to an empty soybean field outside of Bellevue, Ohio, waiting for my friend Tyler to finish a late shift so we could grab food. It was one of those warm September nights where the air feels thick, like it's holding on to the whole day's heat. I had all the windows cracked, the engine off, and some quiet music playing through a little Bluetooth speaker because my stereo had been acting up. The road there isn't busy at night, just a 2-lane stretch cutting through farmland with maybe one car every 10 minutes. I wasn't tired, but I also wasn't fully alert. More like a comfortable daze where the dark feels soft and nothing seems urgent. That's when the red glow appeared. At first, I thought it was taillights way down the road or maybe the plane beacon from the small crop duster airstrip a few miles out. But it wasn't blinking, and it wasn't high enough to be a tower or anything. It was low, like 20 feet above the tops of the soybeans, and just sitting there in the darkness, steady and soft, almost like a distant lantern. I leaned forward in my seat. The glow didn't pulse or flicker. It just held this muted red tone, the kind that should have cast some kind of reflection on the plants beneath it, but it didn't. The field stayed dark. Before I could make sense of it, the light slid sideways, smoothly. No rise or dip, just a straight horizontal glide over the crops, maybe 30 or 40 yards. Same brightness the whole time, like someone dragged a sticker across the sky. That movement sobered me instantly. I sat up straight and reached for my phone without taking my eyes off it. But the moment I touched the phone, the light vanished. Not faded, vanished. One frame it was there, the next it was gone, like someone switched off a screen. I stared at the spot where it had been, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. I checked my phone anyway. The screen didn't respond at first. I tapped it again and it lit up, but the brightness slider had moved almost all the way down. I never kept it that dim. When I tried to turn the brightness back up, the slider jumped around like the touchscreen wasn't reading my finger correctly. I locked it and set it aside, annoyed and uneasy at the same time. I turned off the speaker and listened. The field felt too quiet. I'd been out there enough nights to know what normal sounded like. Crickets, the occasional night bird, distant frogs. But for maybe 15 seconds, I heard nothing. Just dead, airless quiet. Then the insects started again, but not gradually. All at once, like someone hit play on the world. I got out of the car, even though part of me knew that wasn't smart. The warm air felt heavier than it had inside. Not humid, just heavy. I walked a few steps toward the field. The soybeans stretched out in neat rows, and the soil smelled like dust and old rain. Everything looked normal, but the atmosphere felt wrong, like the space around me didn't match what I was looking at. There was a faint vibration under my shoes, soft, irregular. I thought maybe it was a distant tractor or semi, but the road was silent. The vibration lasted maybe 2 seconds and then was gone. I told myself I was spooking myself over nothing. I went back to the driver's seat, shut the door, and tried to shake it off. Nothing else happened for a bit. I checked my watch. It was 10:41. Tyler wasn't supposed to get off until 11. I figured maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing from boredom and stale heat. Then my rearview mirror dimmed. The little auto-dim sensor kicked on, even though there were no headlights behind me. I glanced up and saw the mirror darken like a car was approaching, but the road in the reflection was empty. I tapped the glass. It brightened again. A few seconds later, the mirror dimmed once more. I twisted around in my seat. Still no car, no light source, just empty asphalt disappearing into the dark. I was debating whether to just drive into town and wait for Tyler somewhere with people when a soft sound came from outside the car. Not footsteps, not rustling. More like a single exhale, long and slow, drifting across the field. It wasn't loud, it was the opposite, like it was meant to be barely audible. It came from the direction where the glow had first appeared. I rolled the window all the way up, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. My car interior felt too small, too bright, too fragile. I shut off the dome light so I wouldn't be silhouetted inside. My hands were shaking a little, and I kept telling myself that if something had really been out there, I'd see it or hear it or feel something more obvious. Instead, the silence came back. Not complete, but muffled, as if the normal night sounds were being pushed away. Not muted entirely, just held at a distance. That's when the crops moved. A wave ran through them, not from wind, but from something passing through the rows. It wasn't fast or violent, just steady. A clean line of movement in a perfectly straight path. It was coming from the direction where the glow had gone. I couldn't see anything above the plants, no light, no silhouette, no animal shape. But whatever was making that path wasn't small. The rows parted in a wide, even section that stayed consistent as it moved. I started the car. I don't know how I wasn't already doing that. My fingers felt clumsy on the ignition, but the engine turned over on the first try. The movement in the field stopped, not slowed. Stopped. Every plant froze mid-sway, like whatever had been moving through them suddenly knew I'd noticed. I didn't wait to see if it started again. I reversed so fast the tires spat gravel, then turned onto the road without checking for anything. I drove back toward town, watching the mirrors constantly, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. The night looked normal again. Too normal. Halfway back, I finally got enough signal to text Tyler. I told him I'd meet him at the diner instead. He replied right away, "Cool, heading there now. Thought you were already here. Saw your lights by the field earlier." I hadn't turned my headlights on until I pulled onto the road. I asked him what he meant. He said he'd driven past around 10:30 and saw what looked like my car in the field turnout, but with these bright reddish lights shining on the crops. He said he figured I was messing with my new kit or taking photos with some kind of filter. I didn't answer until I got to the diner. When he saw my face, he didn't push. On the drive home later, he didn't say a word either, even when I kept checking the mirrors. The road was quiet and dark and perfectly normal again, but I avoided that route for months afterward, and even now, every time I see a field lit up by something, headlights, moonlight, anything, I feel myself waiting for that soft red glow to slide sideways just once before it disappears like it was never there. I noticed the shimmer about an hour into the hike, somewhere past the second switchback where the trail narrowed and the trees grew taller and thinner. The morning had started cool and overcast, the kind of gray sky that makes everything feel muted. I wasn't expecting anything strange. I'd taken that trail in northern Vermont a dozen times before. It was my usual Saturday route, quiet, not too steep, just enough distance to clear my head. I remember thinking how empty it felt that morning. No other cars at the trailhead, no distant voices, even the birds sounded fewer than usual. I chalked it up to the weather and kept going. The strange thing started as this faint distortion in the air ahead of me. At first, I assumed it was a patch of lingering fog or some weird trick of the light. But the more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't fog. It was like the kind of shimmer you see above hot pavement in the summer, except it was barely 50 degrees and the ground was still damp from overnight rain. It hung maybe 30 feet in front of me, suspended between two rows of spruce trees, a narrow column of warped space. It wasn't bright or colorful or dramatic, just off, like the forest behind it bent slightly in the wrong direction. I stopped walking without meaning to. The shimmer didn't move at first. It just hovered, vertical and still, the air around it faintly trembling. I thought maybe it was my eyes. I'd forgotten my contacts and was wearing an older pair of glasses. I even took them off and cleaned them with my shirt. Still there. I watched it for a good 10 seconds before it shifted. It drifted left, slow and smooth, threading itself between the trunks. The movement was too deliberate for a weather effect, too steady to be steam or fog. It didn't break or fade or change shape. It just glided sideways, like someone was dragging a transparent curtain across the trail. That was the first moment I felt uneasy. Not scared exactly, just this creeping awareness that something was wrong with the environment around me. I listened for people, for engines, for anything. The forest was dead quiet. Even the wind was still. All I could hear was my own breathing. I thought about turning around. Honestly, I should have, but the shimmer drifted deeper into the trees, toward a slope I'd hiked dozens of times, and curiosity kept me rooted. I stepped forward once, slow and careful. The leaf litter under me barely made a sound. The shimmer paused. It didn't turn or expand or react violently. It just stopped drifting the moment I moved, like it was noticing me. I froze again. After a few seconds, it resumed its movement, continuing in that same gentle glide until it disappeared behind a cluster of pines. I waited. Nothing came out the other side. I walked up to where it had been, half expecting the air to feel warm or cold or electrically charged. But it felt normal. Totally normal. I reached out a hand and waved it through nothing but regular forest air. For a while, I convinced myself it had been fog after all, just fog behaving strangely. But as I continued up the trail, I couldn't shake the sense that something was following me. Not close, just present. The first sound came maybe 5 minutes later. This faint clicking noise, almost like two small stones tapping together. It echoed softly through the trees, not rhythmic, not loud. But the moment I stopped walking to listen, it stopped too. I strained to hear anything else, but the forest stayed silent. I started walking again. Another click. Farther ahead this time. I tried to tell myself it was a woodpecker or a squirrel dropping something, but the noise didn't match either of those. It was too sharp, too clean, like it came from something metallic. The trail curved, and when I rounded the bend, I caught another glimpse of the shimmer, just for a second. This time higher off the ground, maybe 10 feet up, drifting horizontally between branches. It looked slightly wider now, like a curtain stretched in a breeze I couldn't feel. The trees behind it blurred as it passed. I felt something cold sit in my stomach then. I backed up a step. The distortion paused again, exactly like before, as if responding to my movement. I held my breath, waiting to see what it would do. It slowly dimmed. Not faded like fog. Dimmed, like someone was lowering the brightness of the air itself. The warped outline collapsed inward until it was just a faint ripple, then nothing. The forest snapped back into focus. I didn't hear anything for a long time. No clicks, no rustling, no distant hikers. The whole trail felt hollowed out, like the world had pulled back a little. I kept walking, slower now. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. Not quite fear, more like anticipation of something I didn't understand. The trail leveled out near a small clearing with a fallen log I usually sat on for a water break. When I reached it, I noticed the air felt heavier again, like pressure was building behind my ears. And then the clearing dimmed, not visibly, but perceptibly. The colors around me felt muted, the greens duller, the light flatter. I turned in a slow circle. That's when I saw the shimmer again. This time it wasn't a narrow column. It was wider, broad enough to cover half the clearing, a loose rectangle of distorted space floating maybe 6 feet above the ground. The trees behind it wavered like reflections in moving water. The edges fluttered, almost like it was breathing. For a moment, I actually thought the thing might drop toward me, but it didn't move at all. It just hovered, silent and steady and impossibly wrong. Then, from somewhere inside it, a low vibration pulsed outward. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure wave. It passed through my chest lightly enough that I questioned whether I'd imagined it. The shimmer flickered. A single blink, and dissolved. The clearing brightened. The pressure left my ears. The forest sounds returned in one sudden sweep. Birds chirping, distant crunches, the faint whisper of wind finally moving through the branches. The shift was so abrupt it made me dizzy. I sat on the fallen log with my hands braced on my knees, breathing shallowly. I felt watched, but not in a malicious way. More like the way you feel when someone stares at you from across a room, trying to understand you. I stayed there longer than I meant to. When I finally headed back down the trail, the forest felt normal again. Completely normal. Too normal. Nothing else happened on the hike down, but the whole walk I kept glancing between the trees, half expecting that distortion to reappear. It didn't. When I reached the parking lot, there was one other car that hadn't been there earlier, a silver sedan with its windows up and no one inside. It looked empty. Too empty. I hurried to my own car and left without looking back. I've returned to that trail a few times since, but I've never seen the shimmer again. Everything looks ordinary, like it always did, but every time I walk past the stretch where it first appeared, I catch myself slowing down, scanning the air for even the slightest ripple, just in case it's still somewhere between the trees, waiting for me to notice it again. I was driving back from my cousin Evan's place in rural Pennsylvania, taking the long stretch of Route 219 that cuts through nothing but farmland and rolling hills. It was close to midnight, and the weather had done that quick spring shift from warm to chilly. A light mist clung to the edges of the fields, making everything look washed out and dull. I wasn't tired exactly, but the road had that hypnotic feel to it. Dark pavement, faint lane reflectors, the occasional farmhouse lightway off in the distance. My car's radio was down low, playing some old alt-rock station with too much static, even on good nights. I remember the moment the signal cut. Not faded, cut. 1 second there was music, the next there was a burst of static so sharp it made me flinch. Then the static steadied into a clean, perfectly even tone. Not loud, but focused, like it was coming from inside the dash rather than the speakers. I tapped the radio screen, but it didn't respond. None of the buttons did. The tone just kept playing. A few seconds later, the dashboard lights dimmed slightly. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough to feel wrong. Like the power was being siphoned for something else. That's when I noticed the light in the rearview mirror. At first, I assumed it was a car cresting a hill far behind me. But it didn't behave like headlights. It didn't bounce with the road, didn't brighten or fade, just hovered at a distance, perfectly smooth and steady. A single white glow, too high above the road to be another vehicle. I kept glancing back and forth between the road ahead and the mirror, waiting for it to resolve into something normal. But the more I watched, the clearer it was that the light wasn't gaining on me. It wasn't falling back either. It was following. I eased off the gas. The tone from the radio stayed constant. My speed dropped from 57 to around 40, and still the light in the mirror matched me exactly, neither drawing closer nor drifting away. I don't know why I didn't pull over right then. Part of me thought it had to be something explainable, maybe a tower light reflecting weirdly or a plane lined up just right with the road. But it didn't look like anything I'd seen in the sky at night. It had no halo, no flicker, no blinking, just this clean, pale glow. The road curved gently left, passing a field of tall grass. I watched to see if the light would shift or angle differently as I turned. It didn't. It stayed centered in the mirror, like it wasn't in the sky at all, but directly tied to my movement. My heart started racing. I turned the radio off entirely, even though the screen showed the power icon as off already. The tone didn't stop. It didn't change pitch or volume, but I started feeling it in my chest a little, a soft vibration behind the sternum. I rolled down the window to see if it was coming from outside. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp, but the tone stayed exactly the same. I drove like that for maybe another minute, watching the light in the mirror until something shifted. The tone went silent, just cut out the same way it started. At that exact moment, the light in the mirror brightened. Not dramatically, but enough that I gasped and instinctively tapped the brakes. My headlights washed over the pavement as I slowed, and for one sickening second I thought the light behind me was descending. It wasn't. It was rising. Not fast, not in a straight line, more like drifting upward at an angle, following an invisible path. It still looked small, but that might have been distance more than size. It lifted through a thin patch of cloud, and the cloud lit up faintly around it like a lamp behind a sheet. Then it emerged above the cloud layer and paused, dead still. I stared at it through the mirror, then through the windshield as I craned my neck upward. It hung high above the road, motionless, a little brighter than before, but still just a white speck of light. I sat there in the middle of the empty highway, foot on the brake, engine idling, watching it do nothing. Then it blinked, not like an aircraft beacon. Not rhythmic, just one single blink, fast enough to question whether I'd imagined it. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield. The light blinked again. Same quick flash, same perfect stillness afterward. I didn't want to stay there any longer. I eased the car forward and kept my eyes mostly on the road, but every few seconds I checked the sky through the top edge of the windshield. The light stayed exactly where it was. I drove for maybe 3 miles before it happened again. The dashboard lights dimmed, just a flicker, like a quick power sag. The radio screen flashed white and then black, even though the system was off. The air felt thick for a moment, like humidity without warmth. I looked up. The light was gone. Not drifted away, not faded. Gone. The sky where it had been was empty, just patchy clouds and a few scattered stars. I checked the mirror, checked again, rolled the windows down and listened. Nothing. Not even distant highway noise. Just the soft hum of my engine and the wind brushing the open window. I sped up, not to escape anything specific, but because the silence made me nervous. The radio finally reset itself after a few minutes and switched back to the same weak alt-rock station like nothing had happened. When I reached town, the normal streetlights felt almost too bright. I remember sitting in the driveway for a minute before going inside, watching the sky like I might catch even a hint of that pale glow again. I didn't. But later that night, around 2 a.m., when I woke up hungry and went to the kitchen, I saw something strange reflected in the sliding glass door. Not outside, in the glass itself. A faint white flicker behind me, like the light from earlier but smaller, weaker. I spun around instantly. Nothing there. No cars, no planes, no glow. I didn't sleep much after that, and even now, weeks later, whenever I'm driving alone at night and the radio makes the slightest crackle, I catch myself checking the mirror, just to make sure the sky behind me is still empty. So far it has been, but I still listen for that tone, and I still look for that light. I woke up exactly at 3:11 a.m., not because of a noise or a dream, but because I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that someone had been standing in my room. Not was standing there. Had been. Like that sensation when someone leaves a space a second before you walk into it and the air hasn't settled yet. I didn't bolt upright or anything. I just lay there, eyes open in the dark, trying to understand what felt off. The house was completely quiet. My place sits on the edge of a small town in Maine. 2 bedrooms, old wooden floors that creak if you breathe too hard. Normally, if my cat walks across the hallway, I hear it. But the house was absolutely still. I don't know how long I lay like that before I reached over and checked my phone. 3:11. No notifications. No alerts. Just that time glowing back at me in a way that made the silence feel heavier. My eyes adjusted enough to make out the shapes of the furniture. Everything looked normal. The chair in the corner, the dresser, the open doorway leading to the hall. I didn't see anything or anyone, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat behind my ribs, tight and certain. Someone was here. I sat up slowly. The sheets felt cool, the air in the room even cooler against my arms. I looked around again, this time more carefully. That's when I noticed the window. It's an old double-hung window facing the backyard, the kind with glass that rattles slightly when the wind hits it right. Except there was no wind that night. The trees outside were still. The sky had been cloudy earlier, and the street lamp glow normally seeped through, but now the glass looked darker than usual. I reached out and touched it. The glass was warm, not hot, not like a heater, just gently warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, which made no sense, obviously. I kept my hand on it a moment, confused. The warmth was strongest near the center and faded toward the edges. I even touched the wooden frame to compare, and the frame was cold like everything else in the room. I remember whispering out loud, "What the hell?" But even my voice sounded wrong, too loud in the quiet. I pulled the blinds up a few inches and peered into the backyard. Nothing was moving. My yard is small, fenced on two sides, with a patch of grass that never grows right and an old maple tree that leans too much. The security light from the neighbor's garage cast just enough glow to make everything seem washed out. No animals, no footprints, no fog, no shadows, just a still, ordinary backyard. But the glass was warm. I let the blinds drop and stepped back. A faint hum vibrated through my ears for a second, not in the room, but inside my head, like the leftover ringing after hearing something loud, except I hadn't heard anything. I walked into the hallway, half expecting to hear floorboards shifting or something brushing against the walls. Nothing. The house felt empty in a way I'd never noticed before. In the kitchen, the digital clock on the stove was off. The microwave, too. Both had reset, blinking 12, even though the rest of the power seemed fine. The fridge was humming. The overhead light worked when I flipped it on. My phone still had service. Only those two appliances had restarted. Power flickers aren't unusual around here, especially after storms, but the weather had been calm all night. No rain, no wind, no thunder. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air outside felt wrong. Not cold, not warm, but thin. That's the only word I can think of. Like the space around me had been stretched a little too far. The sky was overcast, but the clouds seemed lower than usual, like a ceiling I could almost reach. And the silence wasn't just quiet, it was vacant. No insects, no distant cars on the main road, no rustling branches. Then a sound came from above me, a soft, fading whoosh. Not mechanical, not wind, more like something exhaling as it moved away. I tilted my head back instinctively, but the clouds hid everything. I stood there waiting, listening, trying to figure out where the sound had gone. It didn't repeat, it didn't come closer. It was just gone, leaving only static silence behind. I stayed outside longer than I should have, staring at the sky like an answer might appear. Eventually the silence got to me. I stepped back into the house and locked the door, even though I knew a lock wouldn't matter if whatever had warmed the glass had actually been inside. Back in the bedroom, the window had cooled down. I checked with my hand. Completely normal temperature. I sat on the edge of the bed, too awake to try sleeping again. My cat, Milo, usually sleeps at my feet, but that night he was hiding under the bed, pressed so far into the corner I could barely reach him. When I called his name softly, he didn't come out. His eyes were wide, pupils huge. Around 4 a.m., the normal sounds of the house started up again. A breeze rattled the eaves. A distant car passed down the hill. Milo crawled out from under the bed and acted like nothing had happened. By the time the sun came up, I started questioning myself. Maybe I'd dreamed most of it. Maybe the power really did flicker and I imagined the rest. Maybe the warm glass was just temperature difference somehow. But then I walked past the window again. There were faint smudge marks on the inside of the glass. Not fingerprints. Long, curved streaks, like something had pressed lightly against it and dragged downward. Too broad for hands, too smooth for fabric. I wiped them off without thinking, then immediately regretted doing it. Nothing strange happened the rest of the day. Nothing the next night either. I kept checking the window, but the glass stayed cold, ordinary, forgettable. It's been weeks now, and life has mostly returned to normal. But sometimes when I'm half asleep and roll over in the dark, I get that same sudden certainty that someone was standing in the room watching me breathe. And every time that happens, I reach for the window glass, just to make sure it's still cold. I was out at Lake Marin the night it happened, sitting alone on the rotten little dock with a cooler, a folding chair, and the same beat-up rod I'd been using since high school. It was early September, the kind of dusk where the heat from the day finally eases off and the air smells like wet leaves. I'd worked a double shift at the hardware store, and fishing was the only thing that ever helped me unwind anymore. There wasn't anyone else around. The lake's on the edge of a tiny town in northern Wisconsin, surrounded by thick trees and a few old cabins. Most people had packed up for the season already. I liked it quiet. I liked hearing the occasional splash from a carp or the far-off hum of someone's ATV heading back through the woods. I'd been out there maybe an hour when I noticed the first strange thing. My line went slack, not from a bite, but like the water itself had settled suddenly. The ripples around the dock smoothed out. I didn't think much of it at first, just figured the wind died down. But then the insects stopped buzzing. 1 second they were everywhere, buzzing around my ears, and the next it was silent enough that I could hear the chair creak when I shifted my weight. I sat there, rod in hand, not moving, trying to figure out why everything went so still. No wind, no insects, no water movement. Just a weird held breath feeling over the lake. Then I saw the light. It started maybe 30 feet out from the dock, just under the surface. A soft white glow, round and steady, like someone had lowered a lantern into the lake. Except it moved in a perfectly smooth line, gliding beneath the water as if the drag didn't affect it at all. Fish can glow from reflection, boats have lights, even people can shine flashlights under the water, but none of those move like this. It didn't sway or ripple or flicker. It looked like it was being pulled on a track. I leaned forward slowly, the boards under me groaning way too loudly in the sudden quiet. The light drifted closer, but not directly at me, more like it was tracing the shoreline. I watched it move with this steady, unnatural calm cutting through complete stillness. I remember thinking, maybe it's a diver, but Lake Marin is shallow near the shore, barely 6 feet deep, and the glow wasn't the shape of a flashlight beam. There was no cone, no direction, just a round, self-contained orb of white. The insects started again for a second, just a quick burst of normal sound, then cut out all at once, like someone flipping a switch. I felt this tightness in my chest, like the air pressure had changed. Not painful, just noticeable. Uncomfortable, like sitting in a plane right before it takes off. The light drifted closer, maybe 20 feet now. I could see the water above it clearly, undisturbed. No bubbles, no wake. It was like the lake didn't know something was passing through it. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. The moment I spoke, the glowing orb paused, not stopped with momentum or drift. Paused, frozen in place like it heard me. I didn't move. I don't think I even breathed for a few seconds. Then the light started to sink, straight down, same smooth speed, disappearing deeper and deeper until the glow dimmed to a faint blur. It didn't flicker out or fade in patches, just shrank evenly, like it was dropping away into a bottomless pit. Lake Marin is only about 40 feet deep at the center, but the glow kept sinking long past where it should have hit the lake bed. The dim white dot slid down into the dark until it vanished completely. The instant it disappeared, the insects started buzzing again. A frog croaked near the reeds. A breeze rolled across the dock, making my shirt flutter. It was like the lake exhaled. I sat there gripping my fishing rod so tight my hand hurt. The whole thing had lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt longer. I kept staring at the spot where the light had vanished, waiting for it to come back up. It didn't. I tried to fish again for a while, telling myself it had to be something normal, something explainable. But every little splash made me jerk my head. Every ripple felt suspicious. At one point, a loon called from across the lake, and I nearly dropped the rod. After about 20 more minutes, I decided to pack up. I told myself I was tired, that I wasn't scared, but my hands were shaking when I folded the chair. My cooler tipped over while I was loading it into the truck bed, and I left half the drinks rolling around on the dock because I didn't want to kneel near the water again. Driving home, the silence inside the cab felt heavy. The truck headlights cut through patches of fog drifting across the road. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror even though there was nothing behind me but trees. At one point, the radio crackled, a single burst of static like someone brushed the antenna, but the station didn't change and the music kept playing. When I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor light didn't come on. It always does, even for raccoons or moths. I stood there holding my gear, staring at the dark yard, waiting for the sensor to wake up. When it finally flicked on, it did so slowly, like it was warming up. Inside the house, everything looked normal. My dog, Jasper, didn't greet me like he usually does. He just stood in the hallway staring at the back door, ears up, tail stiff. When I tried to call him over, he hesitated before walking toward me, like he wasn't sure I was really me. That part bothered me more than the lake. I took a shower just to have some noise around me. The hot water helped a little, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smooth white orb cutting through the dark water, moving like it wasn't part of the lake at all. Later that night, right before I fell asleep, I thought I heard a faint humming. So quiet I wasn't even sure it was real. It came from somewhere outside, lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then stopped. Jasper's head lifted and he looked toward the window, ears perked, but he didn't bark. I wanted to get up and check, but I didn't. In the morning, I told myself I imagined most of it. But when I drove past the lake on my way to work, I slowed down and looked out across the water. The surface was perfectly calm, reflecting the trees like a mirror. Nothing unusual, nothing glowing. Still, I haven't been back to fish there since. I keep thinking about the way the light paused, how it moved like it had intention, like it was following something or listening or looking. And the worst part is, every night since then, when the house gets quiet, Jasper sleeps with his back against my bedroom door instead of at the foot of the bed. He never did that before. I was sitting on the back porch when it happened, drinking a lukewarm ginger ale and trying to cool off after a long day hauling lumber. Late August in eastern Tennessee doesn't really cool off at night, but the humidity drops just enough to make it bearable. My place sits on the edge of a small clearing, surrounded by hickory and pine. The porch faces west, but the moon was high enough that night to light up most of the yard. I wasn't doing anything special, just resting, listening to the cicadas, enjoying the quiet before heading in. My neighbor, an older guy named Ron, usually kept a light on at his place about 200 yards through the trees, but that night his windows were dark. It made the whole ridge feel emptier than usual. I leaned back in the old rocking chair and looked up at the sky. The moon was almost full, bright enough that the treetops had this pale outline around them. I remember noticing how still everything felt. Even the cicadas seemed softer than usual, not silent, just distant. That's when I saw it. Something glided across the face of the moon, slow, smooth, and completely silent. At first I thought it might be an owl or a heron, but the shape was wrong. It wasn't flapping, it wasn't gliding on wings. It just moved, a perfect silhouette drifting on a straight path. I sat forward, squinting, trying to make out details, but it had no edges I could parse, no feathers, no body shape, just a dark form sliding across the light. I waited for the cicadas to bounce back after it passed, the way they sometimes do after a sudden noise, but the sound stayed muted. The object kept going until it slipped beyond the moon's glow and vanished into the dark sky. I kept staring at the spot where it disappeared, trying to convince myself it was some kind of bird at a weird angle. But I've lived here most of my life. I know the birds around this ridge. This wasn't like anything I'd seen. I should have gone inside then, but instead I grabbed the railing and stood there, listening. The air felt heavy, thicker than it had any right to be. I took a few steps out into the yard, expecting to hear the usual summer sounds, cicadas, frogs, distant trucks on the highway, but everything was off. Quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like the whole ridge was holding still. I walked a little farther into the clearing. The moon felt too bright, this almost clinical, lighting up every blade of grass. I kept glancing upward, half expecting the silhouette to cross again, but the sky above looked normal. Then something passed in front of the stars. I didn't see a shape that time. Just the stars blink out in a smooth line like something wide and dark moved over them. Not fast, just steady and silent. It slid across maybe 5 or 6 stars before the pattern reappeared as if nothing had happened. The cicadas stopped completely. I stood there frozen, staring up at this one patch of sky. For a second, nothing moved. No wind, no insects. My own breathing sounded weirdly loud in my ears. Then the air pressure changed. It wasn't dramatic, no pop or ringing, just a soft shift like when the elevator starts moving, a gentle drop in my stomach. The hairs on my arms lifted. The whole clearing felt charged, even though the sky was clear and there wasn't a hint of a storm coming. I stepped back toward the porch, not running, but not taking my time either. Halfway there, I felt a vibration. Not through the ground, but through my chest. A low, steady hum that didn't come from any direction. It just existed around me. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then faded. Right after the hum stopped, a faint breeze brushed past me. Just one brief sweep across the yard, rustling the grass. And then, just like that, the cicadas started up again, loud enough to feel normal. I stood on the porch steps for a long time, listening, watching the sky. Everything looked exactly as it should. The moon was bright and motionless. No silhouettes, no shifting stars, nothing unusual. The air loosened up, the humidity settled back in, and it felt like the night had reset. I went inside eventually, locked the door, even though I don't usually bother, and sat at the kitchen table without turning on any lights. My dog, Maggie, trotted over and sat next to me, but she kept glancing toward the back door like she heard something outside. She wasn't tense or growling, just alert in a way I'd never seen from her. She stayed close to me the entire night. When I finally tried to sleep, I kept waking up for no reason. Not startled, just aware, like something nudged me back to consciousness. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and checked the porch again. Nothing. Trees still. Yard empty. But the air felt slightly warm, like someone had been standing out there a minute earlier. The next day at work, I tried to bring it up casually with Tom, one of the guys in the lumber yard. I said, I thought I saw a weird bird last night. He shrugged and said he'd heard something strange himself around midnight. Said his security lights flickered twice, even though they'd never done that before. I wanted to ask more, but someone called him over to help with a delivery, and the moment passed. That night, I hoped everything would feel normal again. I didn't sit outside, but I did peek through the blinds a few times. The moon wasn't as bright, and the yard was just the yard. But around 11, Maggie lifted her head and stared at the ceiling. Not barking, not growling, just staring. I listened for something, footsteps, creaking, wind, but there was nothing. After a minute, she settled down again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved overhead. It's been a couple of weeks now. Nothing else has happened. But every night when the moon is out, I find myself checking it without meaning to. Watching for that shape, that impossible slow glide, listening for the hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I keep telling myself it was some strange bird, a trick of the light, a drifting cloud, anything normal. But the part I can't explain, even to myself, is how quiet the world got while it was happening. Like everything around me paused to let something pass by, and how whatever it was moved like it didn't have to obey the rules the rest of us do. I was walking home from the bus stop after my late shift. The kind of slow walk you do when you're too tired to hurry, but not tired enough to sit down. It was close to midnight, cool for early October, with that crisp air that makes sounds carry a little farther than they should. My apartment was about 8 blocks from the stop, through a quiet suburban neighborhood in Kent, Washington. Most of the houses were dark, a few porch lights still on, everything normal, at least at first. The first weird thing happened before I even reached the second block. I noticed the streetlight ahead of me dim just a bit, not flicker, just a drop in brightness, like someone turned a knob down for half a second. I didn't think much about it. These lights were old and buzzed constantly, so a little dimming didn't seem surprising. But then the next one dimmed too when I got close, and the next. I slowed down, trying not to overthink it. Maybe there was some power thing going on. Maybe the grid was shifting load. Stuff like that happens. But It kept happening in the same way, each streetlight slightly lowering its brightness as I passed underneath it, then going back to normal once I walked on. I stopped under one and looked straight up at it. It hummed softly, the same as it always did. Nothing unusual. I waited a moment, nothing changed. But when I took another step forward, the next light down the street dimmed. Just that one. Just as I moved, I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, a timing thing. Maybe I hadn't walked home this late enough to notice how the lights behaved. But my chest felt tight in a way that didn't line up with any reasonable explanation. About halfway home, I noticed the neighborhood was quieter than normal. Usually, you'd hear at least a dog barking somewhere, or a TV muffled through a window, or traffic from the main road. But everything felt dampened. Not silent, just muted, like someone had put a blanket over the world. A block later, I heard something like a soft electrical hum. It wasn't coming from the streetlights. They had their own distinct buzz I'd learned to ignore. This was deeper, steadier, and it didn't seem to come from any direction. It just hung in the air. I tried to pinpoint it, turning my head, but the hum stayed the same, no matter where I faced. I hadn't seen anyone since getting off the bus. No cars passed, no one walking their dog. It was just me on the sidewalk and this strange tension in the air. I checked my phone, even though I wasn't expecting anything. The screen brightness looked off, dimmer than usual somehow, even at max. A weird brownish tint clung to the edges, but when I blinked, it looked normal again. The battery icon flickered once. Then everything steadied. That's when I realized the street light 2 blocks ahead had already dimmed, even though I wasn't anywhere near it yet. I froze. My breath felt trapped in my throat. The light stayed dim for maybe 2 seconds, then returned to full brightness. I kept walking because I didn't know what else to do. My apartment wasn't far now. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets, trying to look normal, like nothing was bothering me. But every step made me feel more exposed. The streetlights continued their strange behavior, either dimming as I approached, or now, dimming before I even got close, like something else was moving along the street ahead of me. I didn't hear anything new. No footsteps, no car engine, just the steady low hum in the air. When I reached the long straight stretch with no cross streets, the sky over the neighborhood caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just a cloud drifting across, but the shape wasn't right. It was too uniform, too smooth. A faint glow, pale, almost bluish, moved across the sky, slow and steady. It didn't light up the rooftops or the ground. It didn't cast any shadows. It was just there, passing overhead with this disconnected calmness that made my skin crawl. I stopped walking again. The glow moved straight across my field of vision. Not bright, not fast, just deliberate. The kind of motion that makes you realize you don't have a category to put it in. As it passed overhead, the hum around me seemed to thicken. Not louder, just more noticeable, like it was inside my chest instead of around me. Then the glow faded behind a thin stretch of clouds and disappeared entirely. No gradual dimming, no drift into distance, just gone. Right after it vanished, the streetlight nearest me snapped back to full brightness in a way I felt more than saw. 1 second dim, next second sharper, almost harsh. The other streetlights along the block brightened too, all at once, as if someone had turned the neighborhood back on. And the hum stopped. Not faded, stopped. The sudden return of normal nighttime sounds almost startled me. A dog barked somewhere. A car passed on the main road. A vent fan clicked on from a nearby house. Everything felt too loud, even though it was all everyday stuff. I forced myself to keep walking, even though every instinct told me to stay still. My keys felt slippery in my palm as I tightened my grip on them. I tried not to look up again, but my eyes kept flicking toward the sky, searching for the glow. There was nothing now, just stars and a thin strip of cloud. I reached my apartment building a few minutes later. The front porch light didn't dim when I stepped beneath it. The hallway lights inside didn't flicker. Everything seemed normal. But when I locked my door behind me, I realized my hands were shaking. I sat on the couch for a while without turning on the TV or any music, listening to the familiar hum of the fridge, the occasional thump from the upstairs neighbor. All the normal background noise I'd never paid attention to suddenly felt grounding, safe. I didn't see anything else that night. Nothing strange happened the next day either. I even walked the same route again just to prove to myself that the lights wouldn't dim like that. They didn't. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm coming home from a shift, I'll catch myself checking the sky for that faint glow, half expecting the streetlights to respond to something I can't see. I was driving back from my friend Mason's place in eastern Colorado, taking Highway 24 the long way home because I wanted some quiet. It was one of those late summer nights where the air still holds a little heat, but the sky looks crisp enough to see every star. The stretch between Limon and Calhoun is pretty empty, just open fields and the occasional cluster of farm lights way off in the distance. No traffic, no houses close to the road. I liked it that way. About 20 minutes into the drive, something in the engine hesitated. Not a stall, just a quick jolt, like the car lost power for a beat. The radio didn't cut out. The dashboard lights didn't blink. It was more like the entire car went weightless for 1 second and then dropped back into itself. As soon as that happened, I saw a pale light above the highway. I don't mean a bright beam or something dramatic. This was more like a faint, cold glow, almost the same color as the moon, but without a source you could pinpoint. It hovered way up, maybe a couple 100 feet above the road, a little ahead of me, not moving fast, not flickering, just there, like it was waiting. I eased off the gas. The car felt fine again, but the glow stayed in place as I got closer. I could tell now that it wasn't connected to anything. There was no structure, no pole, no aircraft shape around it. It wasn't a plane or a drone, not unless someone invented a way for light to float without anything holding it. I drove under it. As I passed directly beneath, the glow dimmed just a little, almost like it reacted to me. My windshield reflected a soft shimmer I couldn't explain. I checked my mirrors, and the glow didn't stay behind me. It drifted sideways, sliding away from the road without changing brightness. I kept driving. I probably should have stopped or turned around, or done something besides stare like an idiot. But being alone on a dark highway with something like that nearby made stopping feel like the worst possible choice. For a few minutes, everything went quiet again. The car ran smoothly. The radio played low. Fields rolled by in the dark. I told myself it might have been some kind of weather thing, light refracting off moisture or dust. But the sky was clear. There was no haze, no clouds, nothing. I was still thinking about it when the second strange thing happened. The radio fizzled, just for a half second, like someone crumpled a foil wrapper next to the speakers. The station didn't change, and the music didn't drop out completely. It just warped. Right as that happened, the dashboard clock blinked. Not reset, not dim, just blinked once. And I felt the car hesitate again. Same soft jolt as before. I looked out the windshield, and there it was, another pale glow ahead of me. Or maybe the same one. It was hard to tell. This one sat lower than the last, not directly above the road, but off to the right over a field. It moved slow, steady, almost like it was pacing me from a distance. I checked my speed. I was going maybe 55, normal for that road at night. The glow matched me without any visible movement. It didn't bob or drift. It stayed on the same horizontal plane, like it followed rules I couldn't see. Every few seconds it brightened, then softened again, not pulsing, more like it breathed. I rolled down the window to listen. The night air rushed in, warm and dry. Crickets, wind through grass, distant hum of the tire on pavement, normal sounds. Nothing like an engine overhead, nothing mechanical, but behind those normal sounds was something else, a faint vibration, almost below hearing. More like pressure. I felt it in my jaw before I noticed it in my ears. The same kind of feeling you get when you're about to drive into a tunnel or gain altitude too fast, except this was flat open land and the air was perfectly still. When I looked back to the glow, it had stopped moving. It froze in the air, brightness holding steady. I passed it, and as soon as it slipped out of my peripheral vision, the pressure in my ears faded. I sped up a little, not enough to be obvious, just enough that I felt like I was putting distance between us. The road was straight for another few miles before bending toward town. I kept watching the fields to my right where the glow had hovered, but everything was dark again, normal again. Maybe 2 minutes later, a truck came toward me in the opposite lane. When its headlights passed mine, my interior lights flickered. Barely noticeable, but I saw it. The faint hum deep in my chest returned for one brief moment. and then the truck was gone, and the air was normal again. As I approached the curve, I realized something else was off. The sky above the fields to my left looked wrong. Not glowing, not bright, just wrong. Like the stars in that patch were smeared or blurred, the way heat rising off asphalt makes distant objects waver, except it wasn't hot out, and the blur was too high, maybe 40 or 50 feet above the crops. The blur drifted, slow and smooth, the way a shadow would drift if the thing casting it moved silently overhead. Except there was nothing there. No shape, no outline, just the distortion. I slowed down almost to a crawl. The blur passed across the road maybe 20 yards in front of me. Not blocking it, just hanging over the asphalt for a few seconds. I couldn't see anything inside it. It was just a soft patch of warped air. Then it slid upward and dissolved into nothing. The pale glow never reappeared. I drove the rest of the way home with both hands locked on the wheel. Every time my engine shifted tone or the wind hit the car wrong, my heart kicked up. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light looked too bright, as if my eyes hadn't fully adjusted back to normal reality yet. Inside the house, everything was fine. The clock on the microwave matched my dashboard. My phone worked, no weird sounds, no strange shadows. I stood at the window for a long time, though, looking out at the sky above the trees, half expecting that dim white glow to drift into view again. It didn't. But for weeks afterward, whenever I drove that same stretch of highway at night, even at different times, even on different days, I found myself waiting for that soft jolt in the engine. That blink of the dashboard, that pale light hovering just ahead, like it already knew where I was going. The storm came in earlier than the forecast said it would. I was staying at my cousin Riley's cabin near Lake Honeywell, helping him replace some siding and trim that had rotted out. He'd gone back to Denver for a couple days, leaving me there alone to finish up the last stretch of work before the rain made everything worse. By the time the clouds rolled over the ridge, I'd already packed my tools in the shed and was sitting on the porch with a beer, watching the sky turn purple. It wasn't a heavy storm at first, just wind and scattered drops that felt colder than they should have for late July. The air smelled electric. The lake was flat, not a ripple on it, even though the treetops were shaking. That contrast bothered me for some reason. The surface of the water looked too smooth, almost like it was holding its breath. The first flash of lightning lit up the entire sky. In that half second of brightness, I saw something behind the clouds. Not a plane, not a bird, something big and round, like the edge of a metallic disc just barely showing through. I didn't catch much detail. It was more like an outline, a rim, a curve of something solid that shouldn't have been there. I remember holding my breath without meaning to. The thunder followed a few seconds later, low and stretched out, the kind that rumbles through your chest. I kept staring at the spot where I'd seen it, telling myself it was probably just a weird shadow or some trick of the light bouncing off the storm front. Then the second flash came, and there was nothing, just clouds. Thick, dark, heavy clouds moving east. I thought maybe I blinked, or maybe the angle changed, or maybe the first flash had hit the underside of the cloud in some weird way. But something about it stuck with me. The shape had been too clean, too definite. I stayed on the porch longer than I meant to, watching the storm turn into a full downpour. Rain hammered the deck boards. The wind pushed sheets of water sideways. The trees swayed hard enough that I expected one to snap, but the lake stayed smooth. That was the thing that kept bothering me, even more than what I thought I saw. No waves, no choppy surface, just a flat, dark plate of water reflecting the occasional lightning. I decided to go inside when the wind started throwing pine needles into my hair. The cabin wasn't much. Small living room, old stone fireplace, mismatched furniture, Riley never bothered replacing, but it felt safer than being outside. I shut the door, latched it out of habit, and went to close the blinds. Another flash lit up the sky. This time, the reflection came from the lake, not the clouds. A wide, white arc. It didn't match the shape of the clouds or the direction of the lightning. It looked like something curved was shining back at me from under the storm. The thunder hit almost immediately, loud enough that one of the picture frames on the wall rattled. I stepped away from the window. I couldn't explain why, but I felt exposed standing there, like whatever I'd seen might be able to see me too. I told myself I was being stupid. I'd been alone too long, doing too much work, staying up too late. I tried to shake it off. The cabin lights flickered. Not off, just a quick dip in brightness. Then again, then steady. I checked my phone even though I knew the service was bad out there. No notifications, no emergency alerts, nothing. When I looked back out the window, the lake still hadn't moved. That's when I heard the first sound that didn't belong to the storm. A low hum. Not loud, but heavy. A vibration more than a noise. It came from somewhere above the roofline, maybe higher. It didn't match the thunder, didn't sync with the wind. It felt separate, intentional. I pressed my ear to the wall. The hum slid lower, almost into silence, then rose again so faintly I wondered if I imagined it. Then the lights flickered a third time, longer than before. I stepped away from the window and turned off the overhead lamp. If something was happening outside, if something was moving, I didn't want to be the only bright thing in the open. The storm kept flashing every few seconds anyway, giving me just enough light to see the outlines of the furniture. The next flash lit up the entire ridge across the lake. Something was above it. High up, behind the thickest part of the cloud shelf, there was a round, smooth shape that caught the lightning like metal. Not bright, not reflective, just enough to show its curve. This time, I saw more of it. Not the whole thing, but enough to know it was big, bigger than any aircraft I'd ever seen, and silent. Completely silent, except for that faint hum threading through the air. The flash ended. The shape vanished. The darkness felt too absolute afterward, like the clouds were hiding something on purpose. I sat down on the couch because my knees felt weirdly unsteady. The hum faded, then came back stronger, then faded again. The storm didn't let up. Rain pounded the roof, but the hum cut through it somehow. Another flash, no shape, nothing behind the clouds. The hum stopped. All at once the lake reacted, finally reacting. Wind hit it in a sudden burst, whipping up waves like someone flipped a switch. The trees bent, the cabin creaked. Thunder rolled through the valley. The lights flickered one last time before the power went completely out. I sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the storm thrash around the cabin. The hum didn't return. No more strange reflections, no more outlines behind the clouds. The storm lasted another hour before moving east. When it finally quieted, the lake looked normal again. Broken surface, leftover wind patterns, the way it should have looked the whole time. The clouds thinned out and drifted apart. A few stars showed through. I didn't sleep much, but nothing else happened that night. In the morning, the storm had passed completely. The yard was littered with branches and pine cones. The lake looked like any other lake. The sky was bright and empty. But when I went around the side of the cabin to check the gutters, I found the ladder I'd left lying in the grass standing upright, balanced perfectly. No dents, no mud streaks, no sign that it had fallen or been knocked over by wind. Just standing there like someone placed it with care. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the wind did it. Maybe I'm giving too much weight to things that don't deserve it. But every time a storm comes through now, I catch myself watching the clouds longer than I need to, waiting for lightning to reveal something that shouldn't be there. I was outside behind my apartment building, taking a break from unpacking boxes. I just moved to a small place in Helena, Montana. Cheaper rent, closer to work, quiet neighborhood. The air had been warm all day, just under 70, and even after sunset, it stayed mild. I was leaning on the railing behind the building, sipping a canned iced coffee, looking at nothing in particular. Then, out of nowhere, the temperature dropped. Not like a gust of cold wind or the usual evening chill. It felt instant, like someone flipped a switch on the whole backyard. One breath was normal, the next felt like winter air hitting the back of my throat. I remember actually checking my arms because I expected goosebumps, and they were already there. The change was that fast. I thought maybe a cold front was blowing in, but there was no wind, not even a breeze. The leaves on the hedge didn't move. The air was just colder. I stayed out there because I didn't want to psych myself out over a weird weather shift. I kept telling myself it was mountain air, and mountains do strange things sometimes. Temperature drops happen. Inversions happen. My brain repeated every explanation I could come up with. That's when I saw the dim orb near the horizon. At first I thought it was a plane through thin fog, except there was no fog. It wasn't blinking, and it wasn't moving horizontally. It sat just above the tree line behind the parking lot, a soft, white circle with no glare and no defined edges. It wasn't bright enough to light up the trees or cast a glow. It looked muted, like a lantern wrapped in cloth. I squinted at it, trying to figure out what direction it was coming from. West, maybe toward Red Mountain. But it wasn't getting bigger or smaller, and it wasn't acting like anything I'd ever seen in the sky. Then it slowly started moving upward. Not rising like a drone or plane trying to gain altitude. It looked more like it was fading upward, like someone dragging the brightness slider toward the top of a screen. It didn't speed up or slow down. It didn't waver. Just a steady upward drift, the glow thinning until it disappeared completely. When it vanished, the cold air lingered. I remember standing there with my hands still on the railing, not sure if I should go inside or keep watching the sky. I looked around the yard, half expecting to see someone else outside who might have seen it too, but all the windows were dark except one where a guy I'd never met was watching TV with the blinds half closed. I stayed out there. I didn't want to move. Something about the quiet felt wrong. The cold wasn't lifting either. It stayed sharp and even, like every inch of the yard was holding the exact same temperature. I could feel my breath in front of me, faint but visible. I checked my phone, no service, which was weird because I'd had full bars inside 20 minutes earlier. I walked a few steps across the grass, partly to see if the temp shift was localized. It wasn't. Still cold, still unnaturally even. No sound except a distant highway hum and a dog barking a few streets over. No wind. I was heading back toward the steps when I felt the weirdest sensation, like pressure in my ears. Not popping, not pain, just a gentle push. It reminded me of being in an elevator that slows too gradually for your body to track. A soft imbalance. I shook my head, swallowed, waited. It didn't go away. Then the motion light on the side of the building clicked on. There was nothing there. No person, no animal. No branch swaying. The sensor had never been triggered by nothing before, but it flooded the whole side yard with light. My shadow stretched long across the grass, and I felt stupid standing completely still with my breath fogging in front of me. I turned to go inside. Right when I reached the door, the temperature shifted back. The cold didn't fade gradually, it snapped out of the air. 1 second freezing, next second almost warm again. Like stepping from a walk-in freezer to a heated room, except it happened outside with no walls. My phone buzzed in my pocket the same second. Service restored. A couple notifications dropped in, an email from work, a weather alert about potential showers, nothing related to what I'd seen. Inside the apartment, everything felt normal. Warm, quiet. I sat on the couch for a while, shoes still on, trying to decide whether I should check the backyard again or leave it alone for the night. I didn't want to freak myself out or turn every random weather pattern into something meaningful. But I kept replaying that moment, the orb rising and fading upward. The exact smoothness of it, the way it didn't illuminate anything, the way it didn't behave like an object or like light reflecting off clouds. It was as if it didn't belong to the sky at all, but was passing through it. After maybe 20 minutes of pacing around my living room, I finally forced myself back to the window. The yard looked normal. Maybe a bit darker than usual, but normal. Motion light was off. Nothing moving. No sounds except a car passing somewhere down the street. Later, when I brushed my teeth before bed, I noticed something else. The bathroom mirror was fogged at the bottom edge. Not the whole mirror, just the lower half of the glass, like humidity had risen up from the sink. Except I hadn't used hot water, and it wasn't warm enough in the apartment for condensation. And the rest of the mirror surface was clear, perfectly clear, as if only that one band of glass had reacted to something. I wiped it and it cleared, but the moment I stepped back, a faint mist crawled up the bottom edge again. Slow, thin, almost invisible. I ended up leaving the bathroom light on and sleeping on the couch where I could see the window and the hallway at the same time. Nothing else happened that night. In the morning, the mirror was normal. The yard was normal. The air was normal. But every time I go outside now, even on warm days, there's a part of me that waits for the temperature to drop again. For no reason. No wind, no warning, and for something dim on the horizon to start rising into the sky. I woke up because my wrist buzzed. At first I thought it was an alarm I'd forgotten to turn off, but when I looked at my smartwatch, it showed a heart rate alert. Not the kind you get from running too hard, the kind it sends when your pulse jumps for no reason. It said I'd spiked to 148 BPM at 2:41 a.m. I was lying flat on my back, breathing normally, not sweating, not startled, just awake, like something had thrown a switch inside me. My bedroom in Ludlow, Colorado is usually pitch black at night. Small town, few streetlights, a lot of open land around. But when I glanced at my window, the blinds were glowing faintly. Not bright, not like a passing car, just a soft, even brightness that made the edges of the slats visible. I pushed myself up, trying to figure out if maybe the moon was out. It wasn't. I'd checked the forecast before bed. Cloudy, maybe light snow before morning. And the glow was too steady to be headlights. Too diffused. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then it faded, and the room went dark again. I sat there listening, waiting for some sound to explain everything. A distant engine, a plane, even thunder would have made me feel better. But there was nothing. Not even the hum of the fridge down the hall, which I suddenly noticed wasn't running. The whole house felt paused. I swung my legs out of bed and grabbed my phone from the dresser. No notifications besides the heart rate alert. When I checked the graph, the spike looked wrong, too vertical. It didn't climb and drop. It shot up in a straight line and stopped like someone had cut the wire. I stood by the window for a full minute before I opened the blinds. The yard was quiet. Snow covered the ground in a thin, uneven layer. My neighbor's shed light was off, which wasn't surprising. He always killed it before bed. The only odd thing was the sky. It looked a shade lighter than it should have, like dawn was thinking about starting, even though dawn was hours away. It wasn't bright, just washed out. I stared upward, trying to see if anything was moving. I expected to catch a plane or a satellite, something to hook the moment onto. But nothing crossed the sky, and the lighter color didn't match any direction. It wasn't glowing from the east. It wasn't glowing from the west. It was just everywhere at once. I finally went outside. The cold hit instantly, dry, thin, the kind that shuts your lungs for a second. But that wasn't what got my attention. What got me was the silence. No snowmelt dripping from the gutters, no wind, no highway noise drifting in from town. Even the horses in the field behind my fence weren't making sound, which felt wrong. They always shuffled around at night. I stepped off the porch and onto the snow. The crunch sounded too loud, like the world had been muted, except for whatever I was doing. That washed-out sky hung over everything without changing shape or brightness. I found myself squinting at it, like maybe I could force it to resolve into something normal. That's when I noticed the horses. 3 of them stood near the fence line, completely still, all facing the same direction, north toward the open fields and the hills beyond. They weren't grazing. Their heads were up. Their ears didn't flick. They looked like statues. I whispered, "Hey!" just to break the tension, but none of them moved. The silence pushed in again. My smartwatch buzzed a second time. Heart rate spike. I hadn't even felt my pulse rise. I checked it. 132 BPM and climbing. I took a step back toward the house, and that's when the brightness in the sky changed. Not dramatically, just a slight shift, like something far above had moved and the clouds caught it differently. But it was enough that the snow shadow under the fence line slid an inch to the left. I froze. The horses didn't. One of them finally moved its head. Not down to graze, up, higher, as if it were looking at something directly above us. I followed its gaze. The sky wasn't right. It looked uniform at first, but now that I was really staring, I could see a patch of it that was a shade lighter than the rest. A huge, irregular shape, barely noticeable unless you were searching. It wasn't glowing bright, it was more like the clouds there were thinner, except they weren't moving like clouds. They were holding still. My heart rate spiked again. The watch buzzed against my wrist, almost frantic. The little graph jumped so sharply that it cut off at the top. I didn't want to stand there anymore. I backed toward the porch, keeping my eyes on that lighter patch, trying to decide if it was getting bigger or if I was just noticing more of it. My breath looked weird in the air, too slow to drift, like it was hanging before fading. I reached the steps and grabbed the handrail. The sky pulsed. Once. Not bright, just a flicker in that lighter patch, like someone dimming and undimming a light under a blanket. The horses jerked their heads in unison, not panicked, synchronized. My pulse hammered so hard my fingers tingled. Then the patch faded. It didn't vanish instantly. It thinned out, shrinking inward, until the sky looked normal again. Clouds returned to their usual textures. The weird brightness washed away. My yard looked plain and dark. The silence broke with a single sound, the fridge kicking back on inside the house. I didn't realize how much noise had been missing until it returned. I went inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. My watch buzzed for a final alert. Heart rate returned to normal. But I didn't feel normal. My chest still felt tight. I checked the timestamp on the first alert, 2:41 a.m., the second, 2:43. I looked at the clock on the stove, 2:46. I wasn't outside more than a few minutes, but it felt longer. Before going back to bed, I looked out the window again. The sky was dark, no lighter patches, no flickers. The horses had wandered away from the fence. Everything looked ordinary. I left the blinds open anyway. I didn't want any barrier between me and the night, not after seeing whatever that had been. I needed to know if it happened again. The next morning, my watch logged 2 more brief spikes around the same time, even though I didn't wake up for them. I've stopped checking the sky for explanations. I just watch for changes now. I was staying at my friend Marco's place in Rockport for a few days, just trying to get out of Denver for a bit. He lived a couple blocks from the beach, so I'd been walking there at night to clear my head. It was early October, not too cold yet, but the wind coming off the water had that sharp edge that warned winter was coming. The night it happened, I couldn't sleep. I'd been tossing around on the pull-out couch for hours, and around 1:30 a.m., I finally gave up and grabbed a hoodie. Marco was dead asleep upstairs. I didn't bother leaving a note. I took his spare sandals from the mat by the door and walked down toward the water. The beach was almost empty. One couple had a fire going way down the shoreline, but the flame was so small it looked like a blinking star. Fog hadn't rolled in yet, so the sky was clear. The kind of clear where you can see stars all the way down to the horizon. The tide was coming in slow. I remember the sand feeling colder than I expected. For some reason, that detail stuck with me. I walked until I found a spot where the sand dipped behind a little rise, blocking most of the light from the houses behind me. I sat and listened to the small waves slap the shore. It was peaceful enough that I started to regret not bringing a blanket to lie down. I don't know how long I was sitting there before I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were just boats. Fishing boats go out late around there, sometimes early, depending on weather. But these didn't look like boats. They were too far out, way past where boats usually anchor, almost at the horizon line. And they were too high above the water, maybe a couple 100 feet up. There were 6 of them, all in a perfect horizontal row, spaced evenly like beads on a string. White lights, not flashing, not shifting in brightness, just hanging there. I squinted, trying to see the shapes around them, but the lights were the only part visible. Everything else was swallowed by the darkness. I got up and took a few steps closer to the water without even thinking about it. The lights didn't move, not even a little, and that's when I started feeling uneasy. Nothing on the ocean just stays like that. I stood there debating whether to go wake Marco. Then the first light dropped. It didn't fall. It didn't flicker. It just moved straight down in a perfectly smooth line, like someone was dragging it with a ruler. No acceleration, no curve, just down. It sank into the water without a splash, disappearing instantly. The surface didn't react at all. Not a ripple, not a change in the reflections on the waves. It was like the ocean didn't notice. I stepped back. Sand shifted under my heel. The second light dropped right after, same exact movement, steady, controlled, straight. It vanished into the water like it was sliding behind a curtain. By the time the third one started to descend, the wind picked up. A sudden gust pushed against me hard enough that I had to steady myself. It felt too strong to come out of nowhere like that. Usually the wind builds, but this was like someone turned a fan on. I glanced down the beach. The couple with the fire were packing up fast, kicking sand on the flames, grabbing their bags. One of them was pointing out toward the water. It made me feel better that I wasn't the only one seeing something weird, but they were clearly freaked, and that didn't help. The third, fourth, and fifth lights sank one after another, each spaced maybe a second apart, no sound. No splash, just gone. The last one waited. I don't know how else to explain it. It held its place while the others vanished. For a few seconds, it was the only light out there. I found myself staring at it so hard my eyes burned. Then it started moving, but not down. It shifted to the left. Not much, just a few degrees, but the motion was so smooth and so impossible looking that I felt my stomach twist. Boats drift, planes arc, helicopters wobble. Nothing moves in a perfectly straight sideways slide without changing altitude or angle. The last light stopped again, dead still. The wind hit me harder, colder. A wave broke closer to my feet, but when it receded, I noticed something strange. The sound of the surf had gone dull, not quieter, exactly, but muffled, like my ears had popped, except they hadn't. The final light dropped abruptly. No slow descent this time, just a clean vertical dive straight into the sea. Gone. The moment it vanished, the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Like someone closed a door. I stood there waiting for something else to happen. Anything. But the horizon was empty. The ocean was black. Everything looked completely normal. I walked backward a bit, eyes on the water. My heartbeat felt loud in my chest. When I finally turned around to head back to Marco's, I noticed something off about the houses lining the beachfront road. Every porch light was on. I didn't remember them being on when I walked down. The only lights earlier had been from the couple's fire and a few upstairs windows in the rentals behind the dunes. But now every porch light from one end of the beach to the other was glowing. And as I walked past them, they shut off one by one. That sequence made my legs feel weak. I kept telling myself they were on timers or motion sensors, but the timing was too perfect. Each light clicked off right after I passed it, always behind me, never ahead. When I reached Marco's street, I practically jogged the rest of the way. His house looked normal, except for one thing. The little solar path lights in his yard weren't lit. They had been earlier. I remembered them because I'd almost tripped on one coming down the steps. I touched one with my foot just to see if it would turn on. Nothing. Inside, the living room felt stuffy and warm, like the air hadn't moved in hours. I locked the door quietly and checked the time. 2:08 a.m. It hit me then that I'd only been out maybe 40 minutes. It felt longer, like I'd been standing there for hours. I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone looking for any reports of weird lights on the water, but I didn't find anything. Not that night. Not the next morning. I even checked local groups, weather stations, fishing updates. Nothing. When Marco came downstairs around 8, he asked if I'd messed with the thermostat because the house felt strangely warm for October. I told him no. He didn't push it. We drove past the beach later that afternoon. Perfectly normal. People walking dogs, kids throwing rocks, no sign anything had happened. But every time I'm near the ocean now, I catch myself staring out at the horizon a little too long, waiting to see a row of lights hanging there again, perfectly straight, perfectly still, like they never left. I took the photos behind my apartment complex in Flagstaff, just past the tree line where the sky opens up a little. I'd been messing with long exposure shots for weeks, trying to get something decent enough to show my friend Nora, who actually knew what she was doing with the camera. She'd been giving me pointers, mostly stuff about ISO and shutter speed that I barely understood, but it made me feel productive. That night, I went out later than usual. It was close to 11:30, early September, still warm, but with that dry chill that creeps in once the sun's been down a while. The sky was clear in every direction. No wind, no planes heading toward Phoenix, no clouds. Even the traffic noise from the main road was quieter than normal. It was one of those nights where everything felt unusually still. I set up my tripod near a fallen log and aimed the camera straight up. A few streetlights from the complex spilled through the trees behind me, but not enough to ruin the shots. I took a couple practice exposures. Nothing interesting. Just stars, a few faint streaks where I messed up the timing. I adjusted the angle and tried again. On the fourth shot, I thought I saw something move above the pines. A sort of quick shift. Not like a shooting star, more like a shadow gliding across the stars themselves. But when I looked again, everything was normal. I figured it was just my eyes reacting to the bright camera screen. I decided to shoot anyway, 20-second exposure. I didn't breathe, trying to stay perfectly still so I wouldn't bump the tripod. While the shutter was open, I had this weird sense that the air had thickened around me. Not colder, not even warmer, just denser somehow. It reminded me of the way the world feels just before a huge thunderstorm hits, except the sky was totally calm. When the shot finished, I checked the preview. At first, I thought the lens had fogged up, but it wasn't that. Dead center in the frame, right where Polaris should have been, there was a faint oval smudge. Not bright, not dark, just a distortion. As if something had blurred part of the sky in a perfect, smooth shape. I zoomed in, expecting to see a smudge from my thumb or dust on the lens, but the distortion didn't look like anything physical. It had a soft gradient to it, like layers of stars behind it had shifted out of alignment. I turned around and looked at the sky with my own eyes. Nothing there. No blur, no cloud, not even a plane passing by. I wiped the lens anyway, shirt corner, then the microfiber cloth in my pocket. I took another shot from the exact same angle, same settings. 20 seconds later, the preview popped up. Totally normal. Clear stars, no oval, no distortion. I told myself I'd just botched the first one, but my stomach disagreed. There was something off about the whole moment. I could feel it in my shoulders, that strange static feeling tension that shows up when something doesn't add up. As I was trying to brush it off, a faint breeze moved through the trees, even though the air had been still all night. It wasn't strong, but it carried this low, almost electric hum with it, soft enough that I couldn't tell if it was really there or just in my head. It faded as quickly as it came. I tried again with a different angle, toward the northeast, above the darker stretch of woods. While the shutter was open, the breeze stopped again. I felt stupid noticing it, but it was like the air kept turning itself on and off. This time, when the exposure finished, the photo was normal again. I almost relaxed. Then something rustled deeper in the woods. I froze, listening hard. It sounded too even to be an animal. Not the scatter of paws or the shift of weight on branches. More like something large sliding through brush without breaking anything. A smooth, steady movement. I pointed my flashlight toward the noise, but the beam caught only trees and pine needles. I waited. Nothing moved. I told myself it was just the mountain playing tricks on me. I'd heard all sorts of odd sounds out here at night. Still, the hair on my arms was standing up, and not from the temperature. I turned back to the camera and decided to take a rapid burst of shorter exposures, just to see if I could catch anything else weird. I set it to 3-second shots and let it go. The first frame was fine. Stars, trees, faint light pollution. The second frame looked the same. The third frame, this is where things got strange, showed a slight bending of the tree line near the top right corner. Not a blurred motion, but a curve, like the trees themselves had warped inward. Only in that specific shot. I stared at it for a long time, then immediately checked the next frames. All normal. It was like reality had been tugged sideways for 3 seconds and then snapped back. I pulled the camera off the tripod and held it in my hands, suddenly wanting to get out of the clearing. The woods felt different, too quiet, like everything had paused. Even the insects had stopped. That's when I realized something else. The stars directly above me looked brighter. Not a huge difference, but enough that I noticed. It felt like the sky had shifted closer somehow. It gave me an urge to step back, even though nothing was physically lowering. Then a light blinked in my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the camera screen glowing in my hand. I lowered it, thinking maybe it had reflected off something behind me, but the woods were pitch dark. I headed back toward the apartment path, walking faster than I probably needed to. As I got closer to the edge of the trees, the normal sounds of the night slowly came back. Crickets, a passing car on the distant road, the rustle of dry grass. Right before I stepped out of the tree line, something made me stop. It was that feeling, like being watched, not from one direction, not from any direction, just watched, observed. I turned in a slow circle, shining my flashlight along the branches. The beam didn't catch anything unusual, but for the briefest second, the light seemed to bend. Not visibly, more like the focus shifted around something I couldn't see. Like the flashlight dipped over a shape that wasn't there a moment before. My heart hammered so hard that I felt it in my throat. I didn't bother looking again. Once I got back inside my apartment, everything felt strangely normal. Too normal, honestly. I sat on the couch and uploaded the photos to my laptop, zooming in on the oval blur over and over. It didn't look like lens flare, it didn't look like motion blur, it didn't look like anything I recognized. A few minutes later, I checked the time. It was 12:42. I had left the apartment at 11:30. I'd taken maybe 10 photos, walked maybe 200 feet into the woods, stood there for what felt like 15 or 20 minutes tops. Yet more than an hour had passed. I went back through the timestamps on the photos. They lined up with the gap, but the sequence didn't make sense. One of the short exposures was timestamped at 12:11. The next was 12:19. No missed shots, no camera errors, just 8 minutes unaccounted for between two frames that showed nothing strange at all. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that faint oval blur hanging in the middle of the sky, something I hadn't seen but the camera had. The next day, I took more photos. Same spot, same settings, same time of night. All of them looked completely normal. But I can't stop thinking about the oval and the bending tree line and how the stars looked brighter. Just for a moment, like something large had passed between me and the sky, too fast or too transparent to see. Every time I scroll past that one frame on my laptop, I feel the same tightness in my chest I felt in the woods that night. Not fear exactly, more like the quiet dread of realizing you didn't imagine something after all. Whatever that blur was, I know I wasn't supposed to see it. I was sitting behind my cousin's cabin in northern Idaho when it happened. Early October, around 9 at night. The air had that crisp, dry cold that shows up before winter really settles in, and the sky was cloudy in patches, big, slow-moving shapes drifting across the stars. I'd come out there to get away for a bit, to help him stack firewood and fix the loose siding, and mostly just to not think about work for a few days. That evening, he'd already gone to bed. I stayed outside with a blanket and a mug of tea, sitting on the old wooden bench facing the tree line. It was quiet in a way you only get out there. No cars, no buzzing streetlights, just the occasional pop from the cooling chimney pipe and the soft creaking of branches. I wasn't doing anything, just sitting, zoning out, watching the clouds move. My phone was inside charging. I didn't have a book with me. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. Then the ground vibrated. It wasn't strong, not like a quake. More like someone driving heavy machinery a long distance away, except there were no nearby roads, no logging trucks at that hour. It was a gentle, steady vibration, almost like a hum you feel instead of hear. I pressed my palm to the bench, and it was trembling just enough that I could tell I wasn't imagining it. I sat up and looked around, expecting to see headlights coming down the long dirt driveway. Nothing. The woods in front of me were still. The vibration lasted maybe 5 seconds before fading out. I'd just started to relax when I noticed a light moving through the clouds above the treetops. Not bright like a plane or a helicopter, not even as sharp as a star. Just a small, pale pinpoint sliding between two cloud layers. It seemed closer than it should have been, like it wasn't above the clouds, but inside them. It drifted in a perfectly smooth line, not wobbling, not blinking. No sound at all. When it slipped behind a thicker patch of cloud and disappeared, I stood up without even realizing I had moved. Something about it felt off, in a way I couldn't explain. I kept waiting for the light to reappear on the other side of the cloud bank, but it didn't. I stayed there a long minute, listening hard. The woods felt different now, not silent, just muted, the way they get right before a storm. The air felt unusually still, heavier somehow. Then I heard a soft snap in the trees. I turned toward it, squinting into the dark. It wasn't close, maybe 20 or 30 yards in, but it wasn't a normal branch noise either. It didn't sound like weight on wood, more like something brushing a tree lightly but deliberately. I stepped closer to the edge of the yard. There was nothing to see, just the faint outlines of trunks and the dim reflection of the cabin porch light on the dew. I called out, "Hello?" Even though I knew nobody would answer. My voice sounded too loud in the cold air. No movement followed, no repeat of the sound. I backed up a little, returning to the bench, but not sitting down. I kept scanning the sky. The clouds had shifted again, opening a gap directly above me. I could see a handful of stars, crisp and steady. Then one of them pulsed. Not bright, not dramatic. Just a quick, soft swell, like someone lightly tapping a dimmer switch. I blinked a few times, thinking it was my eyes adjusting. But then the star moved. Only a tiny shift, like a half inch at arm's length, but enough that my stomach clenched. It slid a little to the left, paused, and then returned to its original spot. Exactly the same spot, like rewinding a tape. I felt the ground vibrate again, this time even softer, more like a deep pressure under my feet than an actual tremor. I stepped away from the bench and toward the cabin door, not running but moving fast. I kept looking up, expecting something else to happen, but the sky was normal again. Clouds drifting, stars steady. Inside, everything looked exactly the same as when I'd left. Boots by the door, the kettle drying in the sink, my cousin snoring down the hall. I locked the door out of habit, not because I thought it would do anything. I tried to shake it off, but about 10 minutes later, while I was still standing in the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The mug I'd been drinking from was still warm, but the tea inside was cold. Like cold, almost refrigerator cold. I touched the outside again just to be sure, and the ceramic felt warm enough that it should have kept the drink lukewarm at least. I took a sip. It tasted like it had been sitting out for an hour. That didn't make sense. I'd only just come inside. I checked the clock on the stove. 9:46 p.m. I'd gone out around 9:20. I remembered the time because my cousin had said goodnight at 9:15. I knew I hadn't been outside more than 10 minutes before the vibration and the light. Maybe 15, tops. But the tea tasted like it had been forgotten long enough to cool completely. I tried not to think too hard about it. I poured the rest down the sink and went to the living room. I tried watching something on my phone, but every few seconds I found myself glancing at the window. Around 10:30, I decided to go to bed. The woods were quiet again, too quiet. Even with the windows shut, I usually heard owls or the wind or branches against the siding. But that night, there was nothing. When I finally fell asleep, it didn't last. I woke up a little after midnight to a faint buzzing sound. Not loud enough to be a phone, not steady enough to be an appliance. It seemed to come from somewhere outside the cabin, maybe above it. A low, intermittent vibration, like something large but distant. I thought about waking my cousin, but the buzzing stopped before I could even sit up fully. The silence that followed was so complete it felt unnatural. I got out of bed and looked out the small window facing the backyard. The bench was barely visible in the moonlight. The tree line looked totally normal. Nothing moved. I stayed there maybe 2 minutes, waiting. That's when the clouds above the trees lit up. Not bright, not like lightning. Just a soft, pale glow diffusing through the lowest layer. It lasted only 2 seconds, maybe less, and then vanished without a fading effect. Just gone. No sound, no movement, no trace. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, when I went back outside, the bench looked fine. The ground didn't show anything unusual. But when I walked into the spot where I'd been standing the night before, I noticed something subtle. The dirt felt looser, like it had been disturbed recently, not footprints, just unsettled. When my cousin came out to join me, he asked why I looked so tired. I told him I'd stayed up too late reading. I don't know why I didn't mention any of it. I think part of me needed to pretend it was normal until I got home. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on my couch replaying everything in my head, over and over. The vibration in the ground, the drifting light, the pulsing star, the sudden glow above the trees. None of it fit together, but it all felt connected. What stuck with me most was the way the light in the clouds had vanished. Not faded, not moved out of sight, just switched off. Like it had been looking for something, then decided to stop. I live in a third-floor apartment in a complex in Portland. Nothing fancy, just one of those U-shaped buildings with the balconies facing a shared courtyard. Trees, some patio lights, picnic tables no one uses. It's not a bad place. Pretty quiet at night, except when someone's dog goes nuts or someone's kid sets off a firecracker. This happened a few months ago, late spring. I don't remember the exact date, but it was a weeknight because I'd been working late from home and shut my laptop down around 11:45. My apartment was hot, not unbearable, just stuffy, and I stepped out onto my balcony to cool off. I do that sometimes, just stand out there for a few minutes to breathe and look around. It was around midnight. No wind, sky mostly clear. I could see a few stars above the buildings, and the street beyond the complex was quiet. No cars, no people. The only noise was a fan humming in someone's window down the block and maybe a siren in the distance. I remember leaning on the railing and checking my phone. Then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, above the opposite side of the courtyard, near the rooftop line of the building across from me. It was a soft, oval-shaped light, hovering. Not close, but not far either, maybe 30 feet above the roof and kind of centered between two buildings like it had picked a spot. It wasn't bright. It didn't cast shadows or reflect off the windows, just a pale white glow, like a frosted bulb behind tinted glass. At first I thought it was a drone. People fly them around here sometimes. But it wasn't buzzing, it wasn't moving, it didn't wobble or blink. It just hung there, perfectly still. I squinted at it, waiting for some sign of movement. A red light, a tilt, anything. Nothing. Just the soft light holding in the air like it was pinned there. I stepped back inside, grabbed my phone, and tried to get a picture. I aimed through the railing gap, focused the camera, but the screen couldn't lock on. It kept blurring like it was struggling to find the contrast. I took a photo anyway, and it just came out dark. No light, no shape, just the vague silhouette of the rooftops. While I was fiddling with it, I heard the neighbor's sliding door open on the unit to my left. It was Mike. He lives alone, maybe late 50s, quiet guy. Usually nods, but doesn't say much. He stepped out in a t-shirt and shorts, looked up almost immediately, and froze. We both stood there in silence, watching it. After maybe 10 seconds, he muttered, "Nope," under his breath. Not scared, not dramatic, just matter of fact. Then he turned around, slid the door shut, and disappeared back inside. That's when the weird part started. The light hadn't moved once. Not even a little. But the sound around me started fading. Slowly. I didn't notice it all at once, but things got quieter. The fan down the block stopped. The refrigerator hum from inside my apartment seemed to vanish. Even my breath felt muted. It was like being in one of those sound booths, where everything's padded and wrong. The air felt heavy, like pressure was building around my ears. I took a step back into my doorway just to test it. Inside, everything was fine. Sound normal. Step back out, muffled. Same air, same space, just off. Like the light was affecting the space it was hovering over. I watched it for what felt like 5 minutes. Could have been less, could have been more. Time felt stretchy. The light didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It just was. Then, just as slowly as everything had gone quiet, the sound came back. Fan hum returned. Distant sirens again. My fridge kicked on. The usual city noise. And the light just faded. Not blinked out. Faded. Like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch until it was gone. There was no trail, no movement upward or sideways. 1 second it was hovering, the next it was gone. And the sky behind it was clear. Nothing blocking stars. I stayed out there another few minutes. Mike never came back out. I didn't try to knock on his door or say anything the next day. Honestly, I didn't know what I'd even ask him. Hey, remember the floating light? Just didn't feel like something people wanted to talk about. Later, I checked my phone again. The photo was still there, just a black square. No stars, no rooftops. The image before it, one I'd taken earlier of a grocery receipt to text to someone, showed up fine. So did the one after. Just that one frame, nothing but darkness. I didn't see it again after that. But I still check the sky when I step out, especially late. Especially when it's quiet. It was around 2:15 in the morning, give or take. I just finished rinsing a bowl in the sink after a late snack, microwaved oatmeal, nothing special. I was wide awake for no reason and figured eating something might help. The house was totally quiet. No TV, no music, just the hum of the fridge and the faint tick from the thermostat cycling off. Then the power cut out. It wasn't gradual. Everything just stopped at once. The fridge hummed into silence. Lights flicked off. Even the little green LED on the coffee maker blinked out. I stood there for a second with my hands still wet, thinking it might come back on quickly. We get the occasional blink out during storms, but the weather had been calm. Dry, not windy, not even cloudy. No thunder, no lightning, just cold and clear. I grabbed my phone from the counter. Battery was fine. Flashlight worked. I walked into the living room to peek out the front window, just to see if anyone else on the street had lost power too. Everything was dark. Street lamps out. Porch lights dead. The only light was coming from the moon, bright and high over the rooftops. The street looked washed out in a bluish-gray way, like a dim security camera. I stood there for a second, phone still in my hand, not really sure what I was looking for. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the block, maybe 4 or 5 houses down, there was a light hovering above the rooftops. Not a beam, not a spotlight. Just a large, bright, oval-shaped glow suspended maybe 30 feet up. It didn't move, didn't sway. It just hung there like it was resting on air. It was brighter than moonlight, but softer than headlights, like the brightness didn't come from any single point, just diffuse even. The houses below it were lit up with a faint shimmer. I could see the outlines of the roofs and chimneys, but everything looked kind of muted, like the contrast had been turned down, and it was silent, completely. No hum, no buzz, no engine noise, not even birds or bugs, just nothing. I kept staring at it. I didn't reach for my phone camera. I didn't move. I just stood there, one hand on the curtain, watching, and then my ears popped, hard, both at the same time. It wasn't like driving down a hill or going up in a plane. It felt sharper, like a sudden shift in pressure directly in my head. I winced and reflexively swallowed, trying to clear it, but the feeling stayed. Not pain exactly, more like my skull had been filled with foam. Like everything got dull and distant, even though it was already quiet. Then I felt a tightness in my chest. Not like panic, more like holding my breath without meaning to. The light didn't move, but something in the air changed. It felt thick, like I was inside a sealed room. I stepped back from the window and stood there, staring at my own reflection for a second, trying to make sense of what was happening. My breathing felt off. My fingertips tingled. I had this weird metallic taste in my mouth, almost like I'd bitten my tongue, but I hadn't. I remember whispering, "What the hell is that?" to myself. Just saying it out loud, like maybe hearing it would snap me out of it. Then every light in the house came back on at once. The fridge buzzed, the heater kicked in, the microwave beeped, and my phone lit up with a low battery warning, even though it had been at 73% when I walked into the kitchen. I turned around and looked at the microwave. The clock was blinking 12. So was the stove. I walked back to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside again. The light was gone. Not moved, just gone. The street was back to normal. Street lights on, porch lights flickering. The house at the end of the block had a little blinking LED in the front window like someone's alarm system had rebooted. But no bright oval, no glow, no pressure in the air. My ears still felt weird, like the aftermath of a firecracker going off too close, but it was fading. I went around the house and checked every clock, all blinking 12. I hadn't even heard the usual sound when things reboot. No digital chirps or startup sounds. It was just like the house skipped over whatever had happened. I checked the breaker box. Everything was in place, no tripped switches, no buzz or heat around the panel. I walked outside and looked up and down the block. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened during the outage. Not to the house, to me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat at the kitchen table with the lights on, staring at the microwave clock. In the morning, I texted my neighbor 2 houses down and asked if their power had flickered. They said yes, around 2 a.m., but it came back pretty fast. No mention of any lights in the sky, no mention of pressure or buzzing. I didn't tell them what I saw. I keep thinking maybe I imagined it, but I know how it felt. That silence, that pop in my ears, the way everything in the house reset, like it had been unplugged from something bigger. I've had other outages since then. Nothing like that night. And every time the power flickers now, I go to the window and check the sky. It happened last October out on Highway 2 in Washington, just east of Gold Bar. I was heading back from visiting my sister in Leavenworth. She was in the hospital for a couple of days, nothing life-threatening, just complications from a surgery. I stayed longer than I planned, so I ended up driving home late, around 10:30 p.m. when I left. The road's mostly 2-lane through that stretch. Trees on both sides, big evergreens that crowd up against the shoulders. No real towns between there and Monroe, just a few gas stations and some scattered cabins if you know where to look. I was maybe 40 minutes into the drive. It was dry and cold, sky clear, not much traffic. I was sipping coffee from a gas station cup, cruising steady around 55. No music, just the low hum of the tires on the pavement. Then I noticed something weird in the passenger side window. Not in the mirror. This was in the actual glass, like a reflection from the inside. There was this soft, round light, pale blue or white, kind of like the color of a computer screen in the dark. It wasn't bright enough to light up the cab or anything, but it was clearly there, just hovering near the edge of the glass. And the thing was, there was nothing behind me that could have made it. The road had been empty for miles. No cars in front, none behind. I even glanced at the rear view and confirmed it. Totally dark. The tree line on both sides was too close to reflect anything, and there weren't any buildings out there. So I turned my head. Just a quick look behind, over my shoulder. Nothing. No light source, no sign of movement, just darkness. But when I looked back at the window, the reflection was still there. That stopped me cold. I tapped the brakes, not hard, just enough to slow down a little, and stared straight into the glass. The light hadn't moved. It looked like it was hanging just behind the car, maybe 4 or 5 feet up and off to the right, but I couldn't see it outside. Only in the reflection. That really messed with my head. I rolled the window down. Cold air came in. The reflection vanished. Rolled it back up. Nothing. It didn't come back. I kept driving. Heart was picking up a bit, but I didn't want to admit I was spooked. Figured maybe some odd glare from my phone screen or the instrument panel, even though I'd had both dimmed. A few minutes later, I passed under a little bridge, one of those single-lane logging access things. After that, the trees opened up a bit on the left side, and I glanced out over the road shoulder. And I swear I saw something there. Not directly, but out of the corner of my eye, just above the tree line. It looked like a shape against the stars, not blocking them out exactly, more like bending them. Like the way heat shimmers over pavement. There was no sound, no movement, just this faint distortion in the sky. I stared at it for a couple seconds, trying to decide if it was even real. Then, it was gone. Just like that. About 10 miles later, I pulled off at a turnout to collect myself. Checked my phone, had a couple texts from my sister's husband, time-stamped about 20 minutes ago. I didn't remember the phone buzzing or lighting up. What's weird is, when I checked the messages, the signal was gone. 0 bars. I tried refreshing a weather app just to check. It spun for a second and froze. I got out of the car, just needing some air, and leaned on the hood. The forest around me was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, no engine noise from the road. Not even the usual high-up hum from the power lines that run through that area. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. Then I heard it. This faint whirring sound. Mechanical, kind of soft. Not quite like a drone and not quite like a motor. It didn't come from one direction. It felt like it was above, somewhere high, but spread out, like it was part of the air itself. It lasted about 10 seconds, then faded out. I looked up, trying to spot anything in the sky, but there was nothing, just stars, perfectly clear. When I got back in the car, I noticed the dashboard clock was blinking. That was the first time I got genuinely uneasy. I hadn't turned the car off. My headlights were still on, but the clock was blinking like the battery had reset. Same with the radio. It had dumped my presets. Everything was back to default. I turned the ignition off, then on again. The car started fine, but now the clock said 12. It had been around 11 when I stopped. I checked my phone again. It said 11:42, which didn't make sense. I hadn't been sitting there for over 40 minutes. There's no way. I got back on the road, going faster than before. Made it to Monroe in about 20 minutes, pulled into a Shell station, and just sat there under the lights for a while. I didn't get out. Didn't buy anything. Just sat, letting the normalcy soak back in. Eventually, I drove the rest of the way home. Nothing else happened. Next morning, I checked the car's system again. Presets were gone. Bluetooth settings wiped, like it had never been paired with my phone. The strangest part, though, my rear passenger window, there was a faint smudge on the outside glass. Perfectly circular, maybe the size of a grapefruit. Not dirt, not a handprint. More like a residue, barely visible unless you caught it in the right light. I cleaned it off and didn't say anything to anyone. I don't know what that was. That drive dozens of times, both directions. Never had anything like that happen before or since. But sometimes when I'm out there again, I'll glance at the windows a little more than usual, just to check. We lost power around 9:45 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was heating up leftovers and had just opened the microwave when everything clicked off. Microwave, fridge hum, ceiling fan, all of it. I live in a suburb outside Knoxville. Not rural, but not fully built up either. Houses are spaced out just enough to give everyone a bit of yard and a sense of privacy. The kind of neighborhood where most people wave but don't really talk. I rent a little two-bedroom at the end of a cul-de-sac. Nothing fancy. That night was cold, mid-February, but not snowing. Just damp and still, one of those nights where you can see your breath but the air feels heavier than it should. There was no wind. Everything was quiet in that muffled winter way. I stepped out onto the porch with my flashlight to see if anyone else had lost power. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no TVs flickering behind windows, no street lamps. Even the neighbors across the cul-de-sac, the Arlens, who always have their Christmas lights up way past January, were dark. I wasn't worried at first. Stuff like this happens a couple times a year, usually back on in an hour or two. I went back inside, lit a couple candles, and texted my buddy Nate, who lives on the other side of the neighborhood. His power was out too. I sat on the couch with my hoodie pulled tight and scrolled my phone until the battery got low. Maybe 20 minutes later, I looked out the window again. Just killing time, I guess. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't bright. You wouldn't notice it unless you were really looking. But one house, about 4 down and across the street, had a faint light inside. I'm not even sure I'd call it light exactly. More like the kind of glow you see from a turned-off TV that's still plugged in, that low residual hum of a screen. It came from the whole house, though. Not just one window. The front-facing side sort of pulsed? Not visibly. I mean, the light didn't brighten or dim, but it felt like it had a rhythm, like it was breathing. I stood there staring through my front window, trying to figure out if they had a generator. But if they did, I didn't hear anything. No hum, no vibration. The rest of the block was dead quiet. After a couple minutes of watching, I slipped my boots on and walked out to the edge of my driveway. Everything else was pitch black. Trees, sidewalks, cars, all swallowed by darkness. Except that one house, still glowing faintly. It belonged to an older guy named Dennis. Lived alone, maybe late 60s. We'd only spoken twice. Once when his dog got loose, and once when I helped him shovel his driveway last winter. Always polite, kept to himself. I walked halfway up the street, trying to get a better look. The closer I got, the weirder it felt. It wasn't that the house looked lit from within. It was more like the windows themselves were emitting a kind of backlight. Like there was no source of light inside, but the glass had this soft haze to it. I stopped at the curb and just stared at it. Nothing moved. No shadows, no silhouettes. The blinds were all drawn, but there was that same soft pressure to the glow, like it knew I was watching. After maybe a minute of standing there, the porch light clicked on. Not all at once. It faded up slowly, unnaturally slow, until it reached full brightness. It was the only normal light I saw the whole night. The front door opened a second later. Dennis stepped out, squinting like someone who just woke up. He was wearing a robe, slippers, holding a glass of water. He looked down the street and saw me, raised his hand in a half wave. I cleared my throat. "Hey, you got power?" He frowned. "No, you?" I gestured vaguely behind me. "No, just saw your house looked kinda lit up." He turned and looked behind him, then back at me. "It's dark in there. Whole place is off." I stared at him. "Your porch light just came on." He looked at it. His expression didn't change, but his eyebrows crept up a little. "I didn't flip anything," he said. "Didn't even notice." We stood like that for a moment. I didn't know what else to say. The light spilling out from behind him onto the porch didn't match the glow I'd seen from the street. It was warm, incandescent. The other glow, the one from the windows, was colder, whiter, different altogether. "You mind if I look?" I asked. "Inside?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Sure." I followed him up the steps. As soon as I crossed onto the porch, the light from the windows seemed to vanish, like flipping a switch. Now it looked like a normal house again. Dark, with a few battery lanterns set up inside. I stepped just inside the front door and looked around. Darkness. Real darkness. Just like my place. "See?" Dennis said. "No power. Got the emergency lights from the garage. Figured I'd ride it out." He wasn't lying. The place was dim. The kitchen had one of those battery-powered puck lights magneted to the fridge, and the rest of the house was silent. No fridge hum, no furnace, no glow. I stepped back onto the porch and looked at the street. From here, his house looked like the others. Normal. Dark. Nothing strange about the windows. I looked over my shoulder into the living room. Still dark. I mumbled something about heading home and thanked him. He nodded, closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I turned around twice. The house stayed dark, but when I got to my driveway, I looked again. The glow was back. Faint, just like before. This time, it didn't pulse. It held steady. I didn't go back. Power came back around 1 a.m. Everything buzzed to life. The fridge, the thermostat, the microwave blinking 12. I walked to the window and checked again. Dennis's house was lit up like the others now. Normal, lamps on, porch lights steady. The glow was gone. The next afternoon, I saw him walking his dog and waved. He stopped at the end of my driveway and said, "Hey, you still think my house was lit up last night?" I nodded. "Yeah, it looked that way." He frowned, tugged his coat tighter. "I checked the breaker box this morning," he said. "Everything was tripped." "All of it?" He nodded. "Whole panel." There was a pause. Then he added, "Dog wouldn't go near the living room last night. Slept in the laundry room." I looked down at the dog, this old yellow lab that usually barked at everything. She stood there next to him, wagging her tail, happy as can be. I didn't ask anything else, and Dennis didn't offer. I woke up because I heard the little chirp from the home security app on my phone. It was 2:02 a.m. and the screen said, "Motion detected in backyard." I live in rural Boonville, up in the Arkansas Ozarks, not exactly a high crime area, but I keep a couple of cameras trained on the yard and driveway after someone stole my grill last summer. I didn't expect to see anything interesting at 2 a.m., much less this. I clicked the notification and watched the clip. It was almost pitch black in the yard, just shadows from the trees and the wooden fence. Then, for a split second, half a second really, the whole yard lit up, white, like someone had turned on a massive floodlight pointed straight down from the sky. There was no lightning, no sound on the clip, no thunder or thunderclap or crack or anything. Just that flash. The weirdest part was that there was no source in the frame. Not a drone, not headlights, nothing reflective that could have cast the light. Just the yard, bright as day for an instant, and then darkness again. The timestamp in the corner said 21:47. I sat there trying to process it, replaying that tiny blip over and over. I looked out the bedroom window toward the backyard. No light, no glow anywhere. Just the normal silhouette of the fence and trees against a cloudy night sky. I figured maybe one of the critters kicked something into the frame and triggered the camera's motion sensor for just that flash. But that didn't make sense. Motion clips usually show whatever moved, even in the dark. This was just light with no apparent cause. I got up, put on socks and slides, and walked toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. Luna, my black lab mix, followed me close, nose down like she was tracking a scent. I checked the second camera, the one pointed near the back door. Nothing. No motion frame at 2:01. No light. Just normal darkness until 2:03 when the next motion clip triggered because the wind rattled the porch steps. I went into the backyard with a flashlight. The air was cool and humid like it always gets in early fall. Fog was lying low along the ground, thin and creeping. The ground was damp where the sprinkler system had run earlier that night. I scanned the yard and the trees. Everything was normal, nothing out of place, no trampled grass or disturbed soil. I even checked the grill area, which was where the previous break-in stuff happened. Nothing, not even footprints, just ordinary darkness and shadows. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white flash, like I was looking at it from the outside, not from the camera. In the morning, I showed the clip to my neighbor, Warren. He's an electrician by trade, used to CCTV and all that. He watched it with me in my living room the better part of breakfast. "That looks like a saturation clip," he said, pointing at the screen on my laptop. Camera sensors can do weird things with noise and bright spots. I asked him if a reflection or a passing car might have done it. He said no. There's no reflective surface in that yard that could produce that, and no light source off screen. Could be a sensor glitch, but half a second is odd. You don't usually get that clean global flaring from a random glitch. I nodded, but it didn't satisfy me. I knew what I saw, a flash of light, no lightning, no sound. It felt too real for a sensor error. That night, I left the porch lights on. At around 11:30 p.m., I stepped outside to take out the trash. The air was heavy and warm, like summer forgotten to quit. The crickets were loud, and a half moon hung low over the trees. I watched Luna sniff around the grass. She didn't bark, didn't flinch, just wandered, tail low, ears perked a bit. I noticed a flicker from the camera housing, a tiny green LED that blinked when it was recording. I looked up at the sky and thought I saw something, just beyond the tree line, a faint glow that didn't match any star. It wasn't a shape, not really, just this slight pale tint against the night. I blinked, and it was gone. I finished my trash chore and went back inside. That uneasy feeling in my chest stayed with me, like something had brushed past the edge of my awareness even without a sound. Later that night, around 1:17 a.m., I woke again. This time, my phone wasn't buzzing. I just woke up. I looked at the clock on my nightstand, just a dim red 1:17, and listened. The house was quiet. Even the old HVAC unit outside seemed silent. I reached for my phone out of habit and then realized the screen was glowing faintly on its own. I hadn't touched it, but the lock screen was lit up bright. I checked the time again. Same. It wasn't charging, nothing was going on, just lit. I turned it over and the screen went dark. I lay there for a long time, waiting. No noise, no lights, no notifications, just the quiet buzz of electric in the walls. Morning finally came. I checked the backyard camera again. There was another clip at 1:16 a.m., but this one was only half a second long, similar to the night before. I watched it and saw that same yard lit up, bright and white, but this time there was something subtle at the very edge of the frame, a slight shadow moving across the grass. It wasn't clear, more like a blur, just enough that I squinted and rewound it a few times. I showed that clip to Warren too. He just shrugged and said it might be noise from a low-light sensor reacting to nothing. But I didn't think it was just noise. There was something in that blur. Not a distinct shape, not a creature, not a person. Just movement that wasn't like the wind. A few nights later, I kept all the lights inside on and didn't check the cameras. I just tried to sleep through it. I woke at 3:02 a.m. to silence. I checked the porch light through my blinds. It was steady, same as before. No flash, no motion alert. It was peaceful. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I checked the footage. The camera by the fence logged motion at 3:01 a.m. Again, another half-second clip, same bright white yard. No sound, nothing visible except that flood of light. No blur this time. Just the yard, bright as day, and then nothing. I replayed that split second dozens of times. I cropped it, I adjusted contrast, I looked for any hint of movement, any sign of what could have caused that light. Nothing reliable. I talked to a couple coworkers about it later in the week. One joked about a satellite reflection. Another suggested a power grid fluctuation. They all had ideas. None of them fit what was in the video. The weird thing is, the rest of the footage that night, the hours before and after, was ordinary. Nothing. No animals, no cars, no shifting lights among the trees. Just darkness, like always. When I step outside at night now, I find myself looking up at the sky more than the yard. Not watching for flashes, not expecting anything, just checking the emptiness above. I stand there a little longer than I used to, breathe a little deeper, and then go back inside. But I check the cameras every morning, every single morning, and every day I play those half-second clips. Hundreds of frames stretched into a blink that makes the yard as bright as day. Nothing else shows in them yet, just the light and the quiet. I was sitting on the back porch around 8:15 on a Tuesday night, smoking a cigarette and listening to the crickets. It had been a warm day in early August, low 70s with almost no breeze. The sky was as clear as it gets out here in Western Oregon. No clouds, just stars spreading out like a sheet. I had my boots off and my feet up on the railing, just trying to relax after mowing the lawn and dealing with a stack of bills that had piled up on the kitchen counter. Luna, my pit lab mix, was lying at my feet, eyes half closed. I wasn't thinking about much until the air suddenly changed. It was weird, like that moment before a thunderstorm when the pressure drops but without any thunderclouds. The breeze just stiffened, like someone closed a curtain on the air. Your ears feel it first, then your skin. That familiar subtle squeeze, even though the sky overhead was still pitch clear. Luna sat up and didn't growl, but she did stiffen. Ears forward, tail down but not tucked. I thought she heard something, but there was no sound. Quiet, like someone muted the world. Then the light showed up. Just above the treetops, maybe 30, 40 feet up, there was this circular glow. Dim, not bright like a spotlight or headlights, more like a shallow white ring, like a halo floating in the air. It wasn't a perfect circle, a little uneven, but definitely round, and it moved smoothly straight over the yard. I didn't hear anything, no hum, no buzz, not even a whisper of noise, just that light sliding over the cedar trees and across my yard. I can't say how fast it was going, not slow, but not fast either, just steady. The kind of movement you don't really notice at first because it's so quiet and smooth. I stood up, putting my cigarette down in the ashtray, and watched it move. It passed over the roofline of my neighbor's house, old two-story with that faded gray siding, and continued on, heading northwest. There were stars all around it, no dark patch or distortion in the sky. The glow just sort of passed through their space. Luna didn't follow it with her eyes, but she stayed watching, head turned after it, not blinking much. When it got over the trees and was halfway to the ridge beyond town, it faded. Not a blink or a vanishing. More like the light got thinner, like someone slowly turned down a dimmer. In less than 4 seconds, it was gone entirely. I don't know why, but my first thought was to clap my hands once, like that would confirm it wasn't a trick of the eye. It didn't do anything. No echo, no sound, just me in the yard holding my breath. I checked my phone right away. Time was 8:16 p.m. I thought maybe I'd hallucinated or mistaken something else for light, but the moment I looked down at the screen, Luna walked up to me and nudged my ankle with her nose, like she wanted to be acknowledged or maybe just wanted me to move. I asked her if she saw it, and she just blinked slow, then laid down again, ears still forward but not tense. That was odd too. Usually, if she's spooked, she growls or circles, but she didn't. I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and turned on the kitchen light. The house felt too warm, a little muggy, even though it had been cool late in the day. I didn't hear any strange sounds, but the quiet from outside hung in my ears like the room itself was muted. I checked the backyard camera after dinner. It's one of those cheap motion-activated things I put up last spring because I kept hearing noises at night. Nothing. No motion triggered around 8:15. I rewound the timeline, hit play at 15-second intervals. The last clip was at 8:02, then the next was at 9:01. Nothing in between. I checked the power logs on the camera. No outage, no resets. Just a solid hour where it didn't register any motion. Not even an animal. That part bothered me more than the light itself. I tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, watching the ceiling fan, listening for any sort of hum or vibration. Nothing came, just silence. The next morning, I went out to the yard before work. The grass looked a bit trampled, like someone had walked through it from the neighbor's fence to the back corner near the woods. But when I looked closer, the blades were bent the wrong way, not pressed down by footsteps, just leaning strangely as if something had brushed past them from above. I walked around in the foggy light before sunrise, checking for prints, broken branches, anything. Nothing that made sense. No footprints, no drag marks, no tree scars, just grass, bent awkwardly, and some leaves that had fallen in a circle near the fence, but not a perfect circle, just a subtle curve like wind had spun them, except there was no wind that morning. I tried talking to my neighbor Joe that afternoon. I asked if he saw anything weird in the sky. He just laughed and said the town's been quiet lately, just the usual stars and satellites. He hadn't noticed anything. His wife, Margie, didn't either. I went back to that part of the yard later that night, around 8 p.m., carrying a flashlight and Luna trailing at my heels. I scanned the trees, the fence line, the back edge of the property. The air was cooler than it had been the night before, and more still. The hum of cicadas filled the silence. I didn't hear anything like last night's pressure change. Then, right about 8:15, I felt it again, that subtle shift in the air, like something unseen pressed in my ears and chest for a heartbeat. Not loud, not sharp, just an odd sensation. I lifted my head. Nothing showed. No glow, no shape, no shifting lights, just quiet and stars. I walked back to the porch and sat down. Luna lay down beside me, eyes closed, tail relaxed. I watched the sky for a long time, letting the crickets sing and the wind stay absent. Eventually, I went inside. I didn't look up at the sky again before bed. I checked the backyard camera once more. Still nothing recorded from last night. No motion alerts, no weird glitches. Nothing. But every time I walk outside around 8:15 now, I notice the air first. That same stillness, like something is waiting just beyond what I can see. I stand there, cigarette in hand, ears open, hoping not to catch the sound or the light again. Not out of fear, exactly, just confusion and that quiet, creeping sense that something was once there and might still be watching. I lived in a second-floor apartment over a dentist's office, the kind of place that always smelled faintly like mint and disinfectant when the vents kicked on. That night had been quiet. No sirens, no loud neighbors, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and rain tapping against the window unit. I went to bed around 11:30. I remembered checking my phone. 2 unread emails, 1 text from my sister about our mom's birthday. Normal stuff. I plugged it in on the nightstand and turned onto my side. The rain got heavier for a while, then slowed to a soft, steady patter. I fell asleep pretty fast. I woke up at some point in the night because the room felt wrong. That was the first clear thought I had. Not loud, not scary yet, just wrong. There was light in the room. Not from outside, my blinds were the cheap plastic kind that blocked most of the streetlight glow. This was different. It was soft but filled the whole space, like someone had turned on a lamp with a thick white shade. I could see the outline of my dresser, the laundry chair in the corner, the door. Everything looked washed out, like the contrast had been turned down. I tried to lift my head, and that was when I realized I couldn't. It wasn't like being held down. It felt more like my body was too heavy to move, like gravity had quietly doubled. I tried wiggling my fingers first. Nothing. My arms felt like they were buried under sand. My chest moved, so I knew I was breathing, but even that felt slow, like my lungs were working through syrup. I wasn't panicking yet. I remember thinking, oh, this is that thing, sleep paralysis. I'd read about it before. Your brain wakes up before your body does. People see stuff. That explanation felt solid for maybe 10 seconds. Then I noticed the sound, a low hum. Not loud, but steady. It didn't come from one direction. It felt like it was just there, in the air. It reminded me of standing near a big electrical transformer, that faint buzzing you feel more than hear. My eyes were open, and I could move them a little. I looked toward the window. The blinds were glowing. Not bright beams coming through the slats, more like the plastic itself was lit up from behind, evenly. I tried to swallow and couldn't. My mouth was dry. My heart started to beat harder, and I could hear it in my ears. I tried to tell myself it was a dream layered on top of being half awake. That still made sense. Mostly. Then the light shifted. It didn't flicker. It didn't get brighter. It sort of tightened. Like the room had been filled with foggy light, and now that fog was slowly pulling toward the center of the ceiling. The corners of the room got darker, while the space above my bed stayed bright. I wanted to turn my head to look straight up, but my neck wouldn't cooperate. My eyes strained, and I caught just the edge of something in the upper part of my vision. Not a shape exactly, more like a place where the light looked thicker, like heat shimmer over asphalt. The hum got slightly louder. Still not loud enough to hurt, just present. I had this strong, stupid thought that my upstairs neighbor had put some kind of machine on the floor and it was shining through the ceiling. That didn't make sense, and even in that moment I knew it, but my brain kept reaching for normal explanations and coming up short. My phone screen lit up on the nightstand. I couldn't turn my head enough to see the whole thing, but I saw the glow. Blue-white, sharper than the rest of the light. It stayed on way longer than a normal notification. Long enough that I started counting in my head. I got to 27 before it went dark again. The heavy feeling in my body got worse for a second, like I was sinking deeper into the mattress. My ears popped, like when you go up a hill too fast. The hum dipped lower, almost like it was winding down. And then everything just stopped. The light didn't snap off. It faded, smooth and slow, until the room was dark again, except for the faint orange glow from the smoke detector. The hum thinned out and disappeared. The weight on my body lifted in a rush, like someone had pulled a blanket off me. I sucked in a huge breath and rolled onto my back, arms jerking like they belonged to someone else. My heart was pounding so hard my chest hurt. The room looked normal. Dark. Quiet. Rain still tapping at the window. I grabbed my phone with shaky fingers. The screen said 2:43 a.m. There were no new notifications. I opened my messages, my email, everything. Nothing new since before I went to sleep. No missed calls, no weird alarms set. I even checked the flashlight app because I had this dumb idea maybe I'd turned it on somehow. It wasn't running. I got up and turned on the bedside lamp. Warm yellow light filled the room. Totally normal. I checked the window. The blinds were in place, no gaps. Outside was just the wet parking lot and the street light across the road. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stood there staring at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, eyes wide, hair smashed on one side. I kept expecting to see something off, marks, redness, anything. There was nothing. Back in bed, I left the lamp on. I didn't care about sleep anymore, but I must have drifted off anyway. My alarm went off at 7. For a second, I thought the whole thing had been a dream. Morning light came through the edges of the blinds, gray and rainy. My room looked small and ordinary again. The lamp was still on. Then I noticed my phone battery. It was at 12%. I always charged it overnight, and I hadn't touched it after plugging it in. The charging cable was still connected, but it was loose at the wall. Not unplugged, just not fully pushed in. Enough that it hadn't been charging. I didn't remember touching it. I checked my screen time out of habit. It showed over 3 hours of active use between 2 and 5 a.m., most of it listed under home and lock screen. No apps open, just the screen on. I stood there in my pajamas, phone in hand, trying to replay the night. I remembered waking up with the light. I remembered grabbing my phone at 2:43. After that, nothing until the alarm. I told myself I must have been half asleep, messing with it without remembering. That made more sense than anything else. In the kitchen, I poured cereal and noticed the microwave clock. It said 6:17. The stove clock said 7:12. I knew there had been a power flicker earlier in the week, but I'd reset both. I was sure of it. Now they were both wrong, and wrong in different ways. I reset them again, hands moving automatically. My apartment felt slightly off, like after you move furniture and can't remember how it looked before. When I left for work, my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, was out front under the awning, smoking. She squinted at me and said, "Power went out last night for a bit. You lose anything?" I paused halfway down the steps. "I don't think so." "What time?" "Little after 2, maybe?" My TV shut off, came back on by itself. I nodded like that was useful information, like it explained anything. At my car, I unlocked it and stopped. The passenger seat was reclined all the way back. I never touched that seat. No one rode with me. I stood there in the drizzle, keys in my hand, trying to remember the last time I even opened that door. I couldn't. I leaned in and pushed the seat upright again. The fabric felt slightly damp, like it had been left near an open window, even though everything was closed. I drove to work in a fog, not sleepy exactly, just detached. Every time I stopped at a red light, I glanced up at the sky without meaning to. It was low and gray, clouds hanging heavy over the highway. That night, when I went to bed again, I didn't plug my phone into the wall. I set it face down on the dresser across the room. I lay there in the dark, listening to the building creak and the pipes knock. Every little glow made my stomach tighten. Car headlights passing, the LED on the smoke detector. I didn't sleep much, but nothing happened. Still, every time I wake up in the middle of the night now, I check the room before I move. I listen for that low hum, that pressure in the air. Sometimes I think I almost hear it, right at the edge of everything else. I was driving home from my friend Carl's place in Bloomington. It was close to midnight, cold out, early December. No snow yet, but that dry kind of cold that gets into your sleeves when you're not moving. I'd taken the long way back, one of those old state routes that barely sees traffic after dark, the kind with no shoulders and way too many deer warning signs. I like it better than the main road. No stoplights, no semis riding your ass. There's a stretch near Monroe Lake where the trees get real dense, and the road dips and winds like it was laid out by someone half drunk. No houses for a couple miles. That's where it happened. I wasn't tired. That's the part that sticks with me. I'd had one Coke, no booze, and I remember the whole drive clearly up to a point. My phone was in the center console playing music on shuffle. It was warm inside the car, jacket on the passenger seat, windows fogged just a little at the edges. I came around a bend and saw a light up ahead. At first, I thought it was headlights. Maybe someone pulled over or stalled out, but it wasn't moving. And it wasn't the right color. It was too white, bluish almost, like those new LED street lamps, but brighter. It hovered maybe 2 feet off the road, dead center, not swinging or flickering. Just fixed there. I slowed down. My brights were already on, but they didn't help. The light ahead didn't flare or dim with my approach. Just held steady. I eased the car to maybe 15 miles an hour, crept toward it. My first real thought was, deer in the road? Maybe it was reflecting off something, but there was nothing to reflect. No signs, no guardrails, no car. Just the road and the trees. Then I noticed the air. It looked wrong, like waves over asphalt in the summer, but this wasn't summer. It was 34 degrees out, give or take. The heat shimmer didn't belong. It hovered around the light, maybe 10 feet wide, rippling side to side like it was underwater. I let the car roll to a stop, didn't touch the brake, just coasted and eased it into park. The light didn't move, but the shimmer spread. I swear I watched it widen until it touched the front of my car. I couldn't hear anything. My music had cut off at some point and I hadn't noticed. The cabin was completely silent. My ears started to pop. Just a little at first, like when you're in an elevator. Then it got stronger, almost painful. I opened my mouth, tried to yawn. Nothing helped. My sinuses felt like they were about to burst. The windshield began to fog up from the inside. I hadn't turned the heat off, but the air felt stale. I wiped a hand across the glass and saw... I don't know. The shimmer was right in front of me now, but it was hard to focus on, like looking through warped glass. Then everything went quiet in a different way. Not just sound, everything felt still. The trees, the road, my own breathing, like something had hit pause. That's the last thing I remember from that moment. The next thing I knew, I was in my driveway. It was light out, early morning. My hands were still on the wheel, engine off, keys in the ignition. I was wearing the same clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, boots. My jacket was still in the passenger seat. Phone was on the dash, dead. I just sat there for a while. Couldn't figure out what I was seeing at first. I recognized the fence across the street, the crack in the driveway. I was home, but I had no memory of getting there. I looked at the clock on the dash. It was flashing 12. Must have lost power at some point. I checked the glove box where I keep an old analog watch. 7:18 a.m. I climbed out slowly. My knees ached like I'd been sitting too long. My mouth was dry, eyes scratchy. I felt hungover, but not quite, just out of it. Inside, the house was normal. Lights off, thermostat at 68, nothing touched or moved. But when I went to plug in my phone, I saw that it had been powered off manually. Not drained, just turned off. When it came back on, it was 7:23. No texts, no missed calls, no alarms. I checked the call history, battery usage, nothing unusual. The music app said the last song had stopped at 11:54 p.m. I walked out to the car again, opened the hood. Everything looked fine. No damage, no low fluids, nothing left on. I even checked the dash cam I'd installed the year before, basic model, records on a loop. But when I pulled the SD card and checked it on my computer, the footage stopped at 11:52 p.m. and didn't pick back up until the next day at 7:19. It had skipped everything. I drove the same route again later that afternoon. Same curves, same trees. I found the exact bend in the road. Nothing was there. No sign of an accident, no utility work, no lights or equipment or anything that could have caused what I saw. The next day, I walked that stretch of road for half an hour, just to be sure. Looked for burn marks, tire tracks, anything. Found nothing. It's been months. I haven't had anything like it happen again. But every time I drive at night, especially near that lake, I keep one hand close to the gear shift, like I'm going to throw it in reverse without thinking. I still don't know what happened between 11:54 and 7:18. I remember the road, the shimmer, the light, then nothing. But somehow I made it home. I heard the sound before anything else. A low, steady rhythm coming from somewhere above the tree line, almost like breathing. Not the sharp kind you hear from an animal, but long and drawn out, as if something huge was pulling air in and letting it go. I was standing by the fire ring behind my cabin in northern Maine, part of the woods my uncle used to hunt in before he moved to Florida. The night was cold enough for my breath to fog, but not snowing yet. The fire had burned down to embers, and I was about to turn in. At first, I thought it was wind catching on the ridge behind the trees, but the branches weren't moving, not even a little. Everything was still, like the woods were frozen in a way the weather couldn't explain. The sound came again, slow, almost mechanical in rhythm, but too soft and uneven to be anything man-made. I stood there with my hands tucked under my arms, trying to place it. The woods were usually full of noise, owls, the creek, the occasional rustle of deer, but that night everything felt muted, like I was hearing the world through insulation. I grabbed my flashlight from the patio table and shined it toward the trees. The moment the beam went upward, the breathing-like sound stopped completely. No fade out, just gone. I kept the light steady on the branches, scanning for an owl or something perched up there. Nothing moved. The air felt heavier, almost pressed down. I waited for the sound to start again, but all I heard was my own heartbeat speeding up. I lowered the flashlight, thinking maybe I'd scared off whatever it was. The sound started again, slower this time. I snapped the light upward. Silence. This repeated twice. I lifted and lowered the flashlight like an idiot, testing something I didn't want to be real. Light up. Silence. Light down. Breathing. After the third time, the rhythm changed, shortened into quicker bursts, almost impatient. That was when I went inside and shut the sliding door. I didn't lock it at first, I don't know why, but once I was in the dim warmth of the cabin, the woods suddenly felt too close. I slid the bolt across. The cabin wasn't big. One main room, a small kitchen, a tiny bedroom with a bed barely wider than me. Everything smelled like old cedar and the cheap candles I kept forgetting to throw out. I turned on a couple of lights, but they flickered in a strange way. Not off and on, just dimming briefly like the bulbs were stretching themselves thin. I checked my phone on the counter. No service, which was normal. When I walked past the window above the sink, a faint glow caught my eye. It was subtle, almost bleached looking, seeping between the trees in the far part of the yard. It wasn't moonlight. The moon was a thin sliver and nowhere near that part of the sky, and it wasn't coming from the direction of the nearest town. That was 15 minutes away by car. The glow was still, pale, like someone had hung a soft white sheet behind the tree line and backlit it. I turned off the sink light to cut the glare, leaning closer to the window. The glow didn't brighten or move. It just stayed fixed in place, lighting the shapes of the branches from behind. I grabbed the flashlight again. My hand was shaking enough that I nearly dropped it. I aimed it out the back door window, not opening it this time, and shined it toward the glow. Same thing as before. Silence. The breathing sound cut off instantly. The glow faded slightly, shrinking in on itself. I lowered the flashlight. The sound didn't return, but something else did. A faint rustling, not on the ground, but above, somewhere high in the trees, like something shifting its weight on a wide branch. Too controlled and slow to be a squirrel. Too steady to be the wind. Then the glow moved. Not quickly, not suddenly. It just drifted sideways, like fog sliding through the tree trunks, except fog doesn't move in a straight line and it doesn't keep its shape the way this did. The pale light remained soft and uniform as it slipped deeper into the woods, disappearing behind the thickest part of the tree line. The moment it vanished, the cabin lights flickered again. I backed away from the window, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't panicking exactly, but the quiet was doing something to my nerves. I grabbed my jacket and hat, thinking I might try to sleep, even if sleeping felt impossible. But before I reached the bedroom, something hit the roof. Not a heavy thud, more like a dull tap, followed by a series of dragging noises that circled slowly toward the back of the cabin. I froze mid-step. The dragging continued, an uneven scrape across the shingles, pausing every few seconds like whatever was doing it was adjusting its position. I whispered no, without thinking. The scraping suddenly sped up, crossing the roof toward the far corner. Then it stopped completely. For a full minute, I didn't move. My muscles locked up on their own. I kept waiting for something else, a thump, a shadow, anything, but the roof stayed quiet. I crept to the window nearest the back corner and pushed the curtain aside just enough to peek. I aimed the flashlight upward, but the angle was wrong. The beam caught nothing but branches. The rhythmic breathing returned, but this time it wasn't coming from above the tree line, it was coming from the roof, directly above me. I snapped the flashlight beam upward through the window. Instant silence. The dragging sound began again, crawling toward the opposite end of the roof. I lowered the lights slowly, and the dragging softened, then stopped. The breathing didn't return. I backed away from the window, feeling suddenly very small in the middle of the one-room cabin. I sat on the edge of the bed with the flashlight in my lap, trying to listen past the ringing in my ears. The roof stayed silent for several minutes. The woods stayed still. When the sound returned again, it was faint and far away, back where the glow had disappeared earlier. A soft, rhythmic inhale-exhale pattern, low and patient. It felt distant, but not gone. I lay down fully clothed, keeping the flashlight in my hand. Sleep came in short, tense bursts. Every time I drifted off, I startled awake at the slightest noise, the cabin settling, a twig snapping outside, the faint creak of the rafters. Around 4 a.m, the light outside changed. I saw it through the cracks in the blinds first. A subtle brightness moving between the trees again, low and quiet. The rhythm had stopped. Everything was still. I listened for a long time, waiting for another sound, but nothing came. Eventually, the glow faded, retreating into the woods until the darkness looked normal again. I stayed awake until dawn. When the sun finally came up, the cabin felt ordinary. The trees swayed lightly with the morning breeze, like the woods had been asleep all night instead of whatever I had witnessed. I stepped outside carefully, scanning the roof. No damage, no disturbed shingles, nothing out of place. I walked to the clearing where I'd seen the glow. The ground looked untouched. No footprints, no broken branches. The wind moved normally now, rustling the leaves, carrying the usual smell of pine and cold earth. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had before and drove back to town without looking in the rear view more than necessary. That night, in my apartment hours away from the cabin, I tried to sleep again. Just before drifting off, I thought I heard a low rhythmic sound, barely audible, almost imagined, coming from somewhere above the building. I turned on the light. The sound stopped. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I was lying on the hood of my car, parked off a turnout on the east side of Lake Oroville, when I noticed the star move. It was late August, hot even at night. The kind of heat that hangs in the air and makes every sound feel distant. I'd gone out there because the power was out in my neighborhood again, and sitting inside a dark apartment felt claustrophobic. Out by the lake, the sky was usually bright with stars, and I figured I'd stay an hour before heading home. The night was clear, except for a light band of haze drifting low over the water. I had the windows down, a lukewarm bottle of water next to me, and my phone dimmed to keep my eyes adjusted. I wasn't thinking about anything, just tracking the constellations, letting my brain drift. There was a star near the edge of the Big Dipper that had caught my eye. Not brighter than the others, just slightly warmer in color. I stared at it for a while, mostly because everything else was too familiar, and this one felt new somehow. I thought maybe wildfire smoke was tinting it. Then it shifted sideways, just a tiny jump, not enough to be dramatic. More like the way something looks when you blink and realize you misjudged its position. I blinked again, harder this time, thinking maybe I was tired. The star stayed where it was. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and looked away for a second, focusing on the line of trees across the water. When I looked back, the star was still there, but something about it felt different, like it was trying to match the brightness of the stars around it and wasn't getting it quite right. I stared at it long enough that my eyes began to water. The moment I blinked, it shifted again. This time it moved smoothly. Just a slow drifting line to the left, barely noticeable unless you were already watching closely. I sat up on the hood, heart thumping a little harder now. A satellite, I told myself. A plane. Something logical. But planes don't move sideways like that, and satellites don't change direction. I kept watching. The star drifted for maybe 2 seconds, then stopped. Not a gradual stop, not a fade, an instant freeze. When it stopped, it looked exactly like every other star around it, same brightness, same color, same stillness. I couldn't remember the exact moment when it stopped being a star and became whatever it was. I slid off the hood and stood beside the car, wiping my palms on my jeans. The air felt heavier now, like the pressure had gone up a little. A warm breeze came off the lake, but didn't make me feel any better. I tilted my head to look again, but the star hadn't moved since freezing in place. I reached into the car and grabbed my phone to take a picture. When I raised the phone, the screen flickered. Not a normal glitch, more like a slow dimming, then a sudden return to full brightness. It did it twice before I could even open the camera. I lowered it and the flickering stopped. I waited another minute before trying again. Same flickering. I set the phone down on the passenger seat and stepped away from the car entirely, maybe 30 feet. The gravel crunched under my shoes, echoing across the dry air. When I looked up a third time, the star was gone. Not moved. Gone. The spot it had occupied was empty, swallowed by darkness. No faint afterglow, no slow fade. Just missing. I whispered no under my breath, as if that would change anything. I scanned the sky for something moving, something out of place. But everything looked normal. The constellations were where they should be. The horizon was quiet. Then something flickered near the tree line across the lake. A brief glint, metallic like moonlight hitting a smooth surface. I froze. The trees were too far away for me to make out details, but the reflection had come from above them, not within the branches. I squinted, trying to see if it would happen again. Instead, I heard a low hum. Not loud, so low it was almost more sensation than sound. It vibrated in my ribcage, deep and faint, the way distant engines sometimes do. The hum lasted maybe 3 seconds, then faded. Right after it stopped, the star reappeared, not where it had been, much lower now, halfway between the top of the tree line and the cloudless sky. It appeared in a blink. One moment empty space, the next moment a single point of light glowing too steady to be a reflection. Every instinct in my body told me not to look directly at it, but I did. The star drifted upward this time, smooth and slow. It didn't follow a straight line. Its path wobbled slightly, like someone guiding it by hand and adjusting too late. The motion wasn't natural, not the smooth arc of a satellite or the soft drift of a balloon. It looked deliberate. I felt something tighten at the base of my skull. A pressure. Not painful, just present. Like awareness pointed back at me. I stepped backward until I hit the door of my car. My hand found the handle without me thinking, and I pulled it open, ducking inside. I kept watching the thing through the windshield, even as I fumbled for the ignition. When the engine started, the star froze again, mid-drift, mid-wobble, just an instant stop. The pressure in my skull faded immediately. I didn't take my eyes off it. My hand hovered over the gear shift. The star blinked, not flickered, blinked. Off, then on, too fast and too clean to be anything atmospheric. The moment it blinked back on, it was farther away, higher in the sky, smaller, retreating. I realized then I was shaking. My legs felt hollow, like I could collapse if I let myself. I put the car into drive and rolled forward slowly, keeping an eye on the sky and another on the narrow turnout road ahead. As the car moved, the star blinked again, then a third time. Each blink repositioned it higher, dimmer, farther, until finally it blended back into the sky, indistinguishable from the other stars. A perfect match. If I hadn't been staring directly at the spot, I never would have known anything changed. Once the star disappeared into normalcy, the night sounds returned. Crickets. A distant boat engine. A splash from the lake shore. The warm breeze cooled again. I drove home slower than usual, checking the mirrors constantly. Nothing followed. Nothing moved. The sky looked ordinary. When I got home, my phone battery, which had been at 78% when I left, was at 22%. No apps had been opened. No calls made. A notification glowed across the screen for a split second before vanishing. Sky pattern interrupted. 10:41 p.m. I don't have any app that sends messages like that. I sat in my apartment for a long time, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. But every time I tried to replay the moment in my head, I failed to pinpoint exactly when the star stopped being a star. It shifted too seamlessly, too quietly. And now, every time I look at the night sky, I catch myself staring too long at whichever star looks slightly out of place, wondering if it's going to slide sideways again. I found the card when I opened my car door to leave for work. It was tucked into the rubber seal, right where the window met the frame. At first, I thought it was a parking ticket or some flyer someone had shoved in there overnight. I pulled it out without looking and tossed it onto the passenger seat. It didn't slide. It just landed flat, like it had weight. I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, like the kind where fog rolls in without warning and everything smells like wet wood. That morning, the fog was thick enough that I couldn't see the end of my driveway. It was quiet in that way that feels staged, like the sound was turned down too far. I sat in the car for a second before starting it and looked at the card. It was plain white. No logo, no color. Just a name in black text and a job title underneath. Caleb Morris Field Liaison. That was it. No company name. No address. Just a phone number at the bottom. The card stock was stiff and clean, like it had come straight from a printer. No smudges. No fingerprints. I turned it over. Blank. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it hadn't been for the night before. I'd been driving home along the coastal road just after dusk. The ocean was on my right, dark and flat, and the fog was starting to move in from the water. I remember slowing down because the visibility dropped fast, like someone had pulled a curtain. That was when I saw the light. It wasn't bright, not a beam or anything dramatic, just a soft glow hovering low over the water, a little offshore. It moved slowly, parallel to the road, keeping pace with my car. No sound, no reflection on the waves. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to decide what it could be. Boat didn't make sense. Drone didn't either. It stayed too steady, too smooth. Then it stopped. Just stopped moving, like it had hit an invisible wall. I kept driving. When I looked back in the mirror, it was gone. I hadn't told anyone. I went home, made dinner, watched something stupid on TV, and went to bed. Now the card sat on my passenger seat like it had been waiting. I took it inside with me instead of going to work. I told myself I'd just call in sick and deal with it later. Inside the house, everything looked normal. My keys were where I'd left them. The windows were locked, no signs anyone had been there. I set the card on the kitchen counter and stared at it while the coffee brewed. Field Liaison. For what? I typed the name into my phone. Nothing useful came up. No LinkedIn, no business listing. The number on the card wasn't attached to anything public either. After about 10 minutes of going back and forth, I decided to call it, mostly because I wanted it to stop sitting there. I picked up my phone, stepped into the living room, and dialed. It rang once. Then I heard ringing behind me. Not from my phone, from inside the house. I froze, phone still at my ear, and listened. The sound was coming from down the hallway, from my bedroom. I hung up and stood there, heart pounding, listening to the ringing stop. I walked slowly down the hall. Every step felt too loud. The bedroom door was open. My nightstand drawer was closed. The ringing started again. I pulled the drawer open. My old landline phone was inside. I hadn't used it in years. I only kept it plugged in because the internet company told me to. I couldn't remember the last time it rang. It stopped as soon as I looked at it. I unplugged it from the wall and stood there for a while, holding it like it might start up again. When I went back to the kitchen, the card was still on the counter. I didn't call the number again. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer it right away. I looked through the peephole. 2 men stood on my porch. They were dressed almost the same. Dark jackets, dark pants. One was taller, thin, with sharp features and hair parted neatly. The other was shorter, broader, with a rounder face and a calm expression that didn't change when he noticed the peephole shadow. I opened the door partway, chain still on. Yes? The taller one smiled. Good afternoon, you're Mara. Yes. I'm Caleb, he said. This is my associate. The other man nodded once. I felt a tightness in my chest. How did you get my name? You left us a voicemail, Caleb said. I didn't. He tilted his head slightly. You attempted to contact us. I shook my head. I dialed a number, that's it. That counts, he said gently. I asked what they wanted. To clarify a misunderstanding, the shorter man said. About what? The light you saw last night, Caleb said. I didn't answer. We're not here to accuse you of anything, he continued. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page. I asked for ID. Caleb smiled in a way that felt practiced. That won't help. I noticed then that neither of them had bags or folders or anything in their hands. They just stood there, relaxed, like they had all the time in the world. How did you get my phone number? I asked. You gave it to us, the shorter man said. I absolutely did not, he nodded. Not directly. I told them they needed to leave. Caleb glanced past me into the house. You unplugged the phone. Yes. That was unnecessary, he said, but understandable. I slammed the door and locked it. I stood there listening, expecting another knock. It didn't come. When I finally looked out the window, the porch was empty. No footprints on the damp boards, no car in the driveway or on the street. That evening, I went back out to my car. The card was gone. I checked the door seal, the seats, the floor. Nothing. I slept with the lights on that night. The next morning, the fog was gone. The ocean looked normal. I drove to work like nothing had happened. I didn't see the light again. Sometimes when my phone rings at home, I wait a second before answering, just to make sure it's not ringing somewhere else too.